I'm live. Hopefully, buddy Dom will be joining us here. Oh, hope you guys are doing well. It's kind of cold here in Florida, so I'm rocking this Reef Hangout in pajamas. That's right. And we've had a lot of good feedback, and I'm really stoked that the whole idea of what this live show was intended to be about was connecting like-minded, reefers, guys that have been doing this stuff for a long time that, we want to sort of connect on a common level. Sort of like if I was having some free time, like on a Friday night, um, shout out to my buddy Matt, NSB Reefer or Reef. I think it's Reefs actually. Whatever. He knows who I'm talking to. Um, we would be just chatting and going back and forth, and we could literally spend a couple hours on the phone on a Friday night, time permitting, of course, schedule permitting. But yeah, so when I thought about Dom, I was definitely wanting to connect um to him, and given that he's down in Australia, um maybe to even get some different sort of insights. That would be a big factor in the live, and learn a little bit more about the reefing community there, of course. So yeah, he should be jumping in anytime soon here, I'd imagine. If anybody's out there and can hear me right now, can you give me a thumbs up, or in the comment section or something? Let me know if the audio transmission looks like it's coming through clean. I know Rich is out there, I think. Okay, so what up, NSB Reefer Reefs 9472? What up, dude? Like I said, we would be doing this like on a night, and we just hanging out and shooting the shit. Oh, that is awesome. Yes, so I was really stoked that maybe there would also be some of um, the community from Australia that might sort of chime in too. So that'll be killer. Man, this. So yeah, and so I've had some other people reach out and like, oh, check it out. Okay, all right.
Hello.
My goodness, my goodness. What up? Blessings.
How's it going?
Man, this is a long time coming, right?
It is, isn't it? It's been a while.
Totally, man. Like, so, wow, I don't even know where to begin. Like, all right. So for the sake of the audience, and just so everybody knows, this is I always refer to as Dom. Now, do you go by, like, your homies call you Dominic, Dom? You
It's
know,
all Dom. I only think I get called Dominic when I'm in trouble.
okay, cool. So that's what I always thought. But and I'm reading glass. I typically don't need them, but in order for me to see you right now, man, like, I'm showing my age.
That's okay. I've been wearing glasses for years now.
Yeah, no worries, man. But yeah, so and then it's I always knew you, I think, on Reef Central as Wrangy,
Yeah.
right?
So I mean that's usually what I go by on the forums. Has always been Wrangy.
Okay, cool. And so that takes me on a like sort of like a time travel as we go back to the origins of really what like inspired this channel. And believe it or not, like, you're a part of that, and that's why I reached out to you, is because yeah, I was like thinking like, yeah, there's all these other different, platforms and so forth that are going on all over the web. Um, but to me, what I was trying to do is like really hone in on that vibration that I was sort of feeling back in the day. And I want to go back to like 2015, 14,
Mm.
16, somewhere in that time frame. And I want to go to the SPS forum on Reef Central. And the fact that I was like spitting coffee in laughter when I would awake and see some of the commentary going on the night before. And it would be so funny because it would be traveling all over the world. You would like literally see it time stamping and oh shit, here's the Aussies jumping in, or here's the West Coast of US chiming in. And it would be really interesting to sort of catch up every day. And it was a big part of reefing for me, man. And so when I was thinking, I was like, I've got to start connecting with some people. And so that's what brought me sort of to doing this Reef Hangout. So number one, first and foremost, thank you, Dom, because this
No,
is
of
a long
course.
time coming.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is sort of funny where you think about it because a lot of the forums that I've been a part of have been US based forums. So there's that overlap of about, I don't know, we'll say 2 or 3 hours in the morning when I wake up where everyone's sort of in their evening time. So there's a bit of a crossover posting there. But then once it gets to like, mid morning, mid afternoon, my time, everyone's gone to sleep. And so I can just leave a slew of comments and everyone wakes up to all the reactions and, my comments the next morning. And then the same for me, I'll wake up and there's 20 notifications or something.
Right. And then you gives you plenty of follow-up work, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah. So it's sort of it is funny how that has worked, and yeah, back in the RC days with all you guys, Matt, the various Matts and Marks, and Andrew as well. That was I think one of the first forums I was a part of too, aside from one of the Australian ones, and I think it was Reef Sanctuary as well.
I don't think I was familiar with that one. What
I think.
maybe I was. I just was always on Reef Central, and I think that was it, man. I think I was Zeovit a lot, but
Hmm.
those were the two sites that I was really diving into. But we all had our different various forms of what sort of all brought us together, and
Hmm.
it's just really interesting to not only uncover sort of the nostalgia aspect of it, but also like how are you doing your thing, and how is this person doing theirs, and each
Hmm.
week as the dive is happening, everyone walks away with sort of a refreshed like sense of reefing, at least in my perspective, from what I'm gathering, because I know I brought it here to my reef, and I'm just sitting here, I'm looking across the room right now for a change, and I'm like, oh man, this is actually looking really good for a change,
Yeah.
and it's from just going to the basics, so I
Hmm.
that's reefing is what brings us together, right? And but first and foremost, I want to sort of learn your background, like what inspired you, like, all right, so where were you at like in that time frame in terms of reefing, like in your career or your like hobby, and having your hands salty, if you will.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always loved fish. I think it probably started with a cousin who was much older than me. He had a big, oh, it would have been a big 4 foot or something freshwater tank. This was back when I was probably 4 or 5 or something. And from that point onwards, I'm just completely enamored and in love with fish. So I had freshwater tanks from about 10 years old. Just small ones, just moving through that. And then it wasn't until I want to say around 2010 was when I really started to start looking into, saltwater tanks and reef keeping and all of that. And I think that was about the time I joined, I think it was Reef Sanctuary, and, just did probably 2 or 3 years of research, reading other people's threads, looking at what equipment they were using, who's using what sort of tanks. And, so I spent, yeah, it would have been a good 2 or 3 years, just straight research into reefing. What there wasn't really much in the way of videos to watch. It was all sort of, you read other people's threads, you read their journals, you read, updates and all those sorts of things. And it was about that, yeah, 2013-ish, I think, was when I first got that 2 foot cube. And that was sort of, I think shortly thereafter was when I joined RC. I think that would have been about 2014. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so I think they're the time frames. I mean, it could be off by a little bit,
So
but
you were pretty young then too. Then I would imagine. I mean, you weren't you were like you were younger like
mm,
in your like career as far as your life is concerned.
yeah, I would
You
have
weren't
been.
like older like me.
No, I would have been. I reckon I would have been 19 or 20 when I got my first saltwater tank.
Okay. No, that I just was trying
Yeah,
to kind of fit things into perspective.
yeah,
All right,
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So
So it would have been about then when when I first got that 2 foot cube. And it was, I would say, within about 2 months I was keeping acros. It was because I'd done all this research. I knew sort of, I had a
uh,
rough idea of what all the corals were. I knew what I liked. I knew what I was aiming for. And so when I went in, the mindset immediately was, this is what the goals are. I'm going to move towards acros. I want to keep acros because they're slightly more challenging, and that means they're a little bit more rewarding. And the colors that you get out of them, if you can get those colors, that's also a good accomplishment. And so I think the first acro I bought was, would have been within 2 or 3 months of setting up that tank.
that's phenomenal, man, and that's a testament to back then we tended to or we sort of read more books, right? We
Mm,
looked at sort of that organic way of trying to learn. Not that there's anything wrong with learning, through the newer platforms and whatnot, but it forced the issue, in my opinion, of the challenge of learning. And so it was like, and the avenues weren't as wide open as they are now. And so you had to actually seek it.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. It wasn't as easily accessible, and so you had to join those forums, and you sort of had to do a bit of research to find the forums to start with. It wasn't, you didn't search reef keeping on Facebook and be spammed with 500 different group options that you can join. It was, you sort of had to dig for it, and then you sort of had to decide what you wanted to do, and through that research of looking at things, that was how you got into, I'm going to start looking at this, or I'm going to start doing that, or what lights are there, and this is also back when a lot of people were still building their own things. I read multiple
Mhm.
gimmer build threads and people creating their own lights, and when LEDs started to come in, I don't know how many threads I read of people building their own LED boards and setting them all up, having the Meanwell drivers and all those sorts of things. It's sort of,
Oh,
it
absolutely.
changed a bit because people just buy everything sort of off the shelf these days, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but it's been a bit of a shift in the hobby and how that sort of works nowadays.
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree. I think it it it's sort of forced the hands-on, get your hands involved experience, and through the
Mm,
virtue of that, it encouraged you to learn various different aspects, not only like you're mentioning here of reef keeping alone is a challenge, but you had to learn, like you're saying, you had to learn how to put together lights, or all kinds of, like, how to build your own filtration in some cases,
mm,
or how to build sand bucket refugiums, or all these different things that we did in order to
mm,
get that experience. And I think what it did is it fostered multiple avenues of learning and engagement. And so that's, you can only get so much engagement through sort of the show and tell that I think we experience these days. And
mm,
for me, I was sort of missing out on that being an older fellow. and and I felt like that's what encouraged me
mm.
to sort of reach out and bring you aboard and say, look, do you remember that time frame of what it felt like, and that experience, and then just from there kind of transition into where you at, and what's going on in your world, like tell me about like all of that stuff, so like sort of to catch up because it feels like lost time.
It's sort of, it's been such a long time too, so it was like, there was the 2 foot cube that I had for a few years, and then we moved place and I got Andrew's old, I think it was a 3.5-ish foot shallow tank, so I got that off him, and then was running that for, I think I ran that for, would have been 4, 5, 6 years or so. And then we moved into the place we're currently in. And that was when I upgraded to this tank behind me. And that was sort of a part of making the move a little bit easier because it meant that I had the tank at the previous place. I got this in here and we set this up. And then that sort of meant I just shifted everything across rather than, having to bring everyone here, have them in tubs, set them up, do all of that, mucking around, cycling, all that sort of stuff. And so we moved into this one. And then I will say I made the mistake because I think it's a mistake these days. I started this tank originally dry with dead rock and bacteria. And I would say for 3 years that this tank was nothing but trouble. Nothing went right. I had the most heinous blooms of all sorts of snotty algae, diatoms, cloudy water, all of these issues. And it just they just kept cropping up. I'd solve one and then a new one would crop up, within days. And so eventually it got to a point where then something also happened and I think a viral strain or something got into the tank and it pretty much wiped out all of the fish. And so at that point, it was a pretty low point in terms of, when you lose fish that you've had for several years, 5, 10 years, that sort of thing. It's a pretty demoralizing thing to occur in the hobby. And so, because I'm part of the forums as well, everyone's really supportive. And so instead of just sort of going, well, no, let's just shut everything down and take a break, because that was sort of how I was feeling. In the back of my mind, I'm also saying to myself, you're going to shut this tank down, you're going to have this break, and you're going to be back within 12 months. So what really is, what is the point in shutting down completely? Because you're going to keep all of the gear, you're going to be back within a certain time frame. Like I knew I was never going to be able to stay away. So what I decided was I was just going to completely gut the tank, strip it all down. I bleached everything. I just went the full nuclear option. It was all dead. And then I restarted this, but I went back, a bit old school. I went and bought 20 kilos of live rock. So what's that? 30-ish pounds of live rock, 40 pounds of live rock, and put that in the sump and started the tank with that and the leftover rock that was dead up in the tank. And so I did that with live rock again, because pest be damn, I don't care about that. I'd rather have the stable, that bacteria, that ecosystem, all of that sort of good stuff that you get with live rock that you just can't get in bottled bacteria. I mean, yes, you can start a tank with them and they work fantastically for some people, but I personally, and in my experience, don't think it's a good way to start a tank anymore. I will never start a tank without live rock again. It just makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, I
And
think
so,
I agree.
yeah. And then so sort of here we are. This has been running for 3 or 4 years now, I think, since the restart. And I've only just in the last, what's it been, 2, 3, 4 months, started adding acros again. It's been a very relaxed journey so far. I sort of, when I restarted this, was focused on building that fish population back up and getting some fish that I really like, because fish here in Australia are not only absurdly expensive, but they're also difficult to find if you have any kind of slightly odd taste. And I generally have pretty odd taste in fish. I like my butterflies, I like my dwarf angels, I like the big angels. So finding those and getting them when they're available, it's sort of like you have to be ready to jump on that sort of thing. You can't just sort of sit back and wait. There's fish that I've had that I've only ever seen come up for availability here maybe once or twice across the sort of 10, 15 years I've been in the hobby.
Oh my goodness. That
Yeah.
rare, huh?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
wow.
And so, but this is a fish that you might be able to buy once or twice a year. That's the access that you guys have to it in the US from the suppliers and the collectors you get. With the
Mhm.
quarantine restrictions and the imports and all of that sort of stuff here in Australia, we're very limited in terms of fish species that we're even allowed to import. And then actually having someone take the risk of importing something that's slightly more unusual or slightly more expensive is also an unusual thing as well. And then so it sort of is this giant combination of things that can make fish a bit tricky. So that was sort of why I said we're gonna start this tank and we're just gonna let it roll, and I'm just gonna wait for the fish that I want so that I can get the fish that I want when they come up available, and then we can jump into acros again, because I can get, being in Australia, we can get those great acros at almost any time. They're whether they're wild caught or they're big frags or they're colonies and those sorts of things from other people. There's no shortage of acro here, and there's no shortage of just stunning coral. And that sort of makes up for the lack of fish. Is our access to coral is probably some of the best in the world. And these are corals that have come off the reef within 48 hours sometimes, and they're already in your tank.
Oh, that's
That's how
insane.
quickly you can get access to just these insane pieces.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Like, so yeah, that definitely changes your strategy, if you will, because like
Mm,
then you would typically, I would always want to like be sourcing like the acros is sort of like the final, like or not as the final touch, but I like when I usually would get a reef going like you did in your first reef is to load up on that, and instead you're like looking for the fish, and then the
mm,
coral is very abundant, so it does change sort of like your strategy, and that's pretty cool to understand, but yeah, the corals have always been amazing from Australia. Like
mm,
stuff that I wish I could, see that unfortunately tenuous kind of, because of the craze, if you will, with it here. A lot of things just weren't being brought in. So
mm.
like the old prostratas and and
Yeah.
then some of the spaths and things like that from Australia are just,
Mm.
to me, those are the ones. And then like the ice fire echinata, like
I
Troy
saw
Lee just
Lee mentioned
mentioned.
that.
Like I remember looking at Andrew's ice fire echinata and some of the shit he was putting in his tank, and it wasn't shit, by the way, but I was just blown away.
Oh,
Like just blown away, like speechless,
his
like
his
seriously.
his eye for acro as well. To look at a store, to go into a store and see, because like that was the thing. That was almost a weekly occurrence or every second week for a couple of years. There was Andrew and I go down to Dave's or someone else's store, and we just go and bum around and be annoying for a couple of hours. But I'd be there, and he'd point to an acro, and he'd go, "Yeah, that's going to be absolutely incredible if you give it the right amount of love." And he was always right. He just had this eye where he could just look at a piece and go, "Yeah, I know exactly what that's going to do, and that's going to be an absolute showstopper." And yeah, he was just always right. It was certainly something to behold. That's for sure.
Well, for context, I think it's important that we sort of give a little background on when we're mentioning Andrew. I
Mm,
think the world and I wish Andrew all of the love and respect and everything in the world, and I miss him dearly.
mm,
But I definitely want to make sure that people are aware of who he was. It was a splash of color was the name of
yeah,
his thread on the SPS forum. And if you knew who Andrew was, and there are some people that I interact with and engage with on the other forums that really remind me of him with the sarcastic, just slapstick sarcasm, and just demonstrative but loving, and just
mm,
absolute, like just the most amazing person, in the hobby, and I looked forward to the commentary. I look forward to all of our commentary, but
mm,
he was notable, and that thread he had going had so much engagement, and so many people connected from all over the place.
yes,
And so I wanted to make sure that we sort of background, Andrew Biggles, and a splash of color. And then now that way, if anybody is out there that listens moving forward or hones in later for whatever reason, then they can know that, not sort of the backstory on where we're going with this. So yeah, I thought it
yeah.
was important to mention.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely was important to mention because, like, on top of his shenanigans on the forums, I still remember him, posting pictures of acros that he'd thrown onto the roof next door, threatening other users and saying, "This is what happens when acros don't behave. They get the roof treatment." And there'd be a little frag sitting on top of the roof because it had died, and so he was saying, "Oh, that acros behave poorly, so it gets the jail treatment." And there was a lot of shenanigans and a lot of tomfoolery, and he was very sarcastic and funny. And on top of that, he was probably what I would consider one of the biggest mentors for reefing for me. You know, his ability to keep acros was, I would say, almost second to none. Like his tank was just phenomenal. His knowledge on acros, you know, the simplicity at which he ran his tank as well is just like he was dripping elk out of a plastic container that sat on the edge of his sump. There were no dosing lines. There was no testing. There was no. I mean, he tested with test kits, but you know, there was none of that sort of fancy equipment. You know, even just as a baseline of dosing pumps, he didn't have any of that. He was doing it all by hand, and you know, we all knew how stunning that tank was, and in person, it was just like something to behold. It was truly incredible, and so to have someone like that in my reef journey is incredibly lucky. You know, I'm super thankful for that because you know I had someone there that was able to say, hey, you know, these are the things that you should be looking for. You know, this is how I run my tank, and to have that experience and then you know the proof of what he was doing right there in his tank was just fantastic. You know, and we got along like a house on fire.
Yeah, I mean, it was a time where, like I said, and I think he spoke a language that like acro. It was like this. I don't know. It's you see these special treats, you know, every once in a while that have this sort
Mm,
of language that is a different language that they're able to speak, almost like they have the ability to connect on a different level. And it seemed
mm,
like he had sort of that thing,
mm,
that's what I was always just so drawn to Andrew over was just the unspoken sort of love language that he had with it's like a gardener has with plants, you know, like just a
mm.
there's this sort of relationship that's created. And I think he had that, and I don't know where he's at as far as that goes these days, but I thought it was worth noting because it was a big hallmark,
Yeah.
like in my history, you know, for me to be able to see you, Rich and Troy Lee and Alan, and you know, and the list is going on, and there's more and more people that over time that will continue to surface from that era, as
Mm.
well as you know current, and sort of bring this together, and that's sort of what I wanted to make sure that we uncovered. But most importantly today too is you know, especially before like my signal gets stupid because my area, I want to make sure you catch me up to what's going on with like your current reef. I think you have a water box reef. I'm not sure the length, the dimensions, the filtration. If you want to take the time to
Yeah.
sort of let's like see what's going on. The floor is yours, man.
Yeah, yeah, of course. We can.
Oh, we might have lost him for a second. It's all good. Oh, there he is.
Sorry,
Ah, no
I
worries.
pressed the wrong button.
And trust me,
So
I'm
yeah,
known
so
for doing
I
shit like that.
we've upgraded the tank is a water box 4 foot, 4.5 foot, I think. Um,
Okay.
as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. It's nice and simple. I don't do anything fancy or anything, you know, special in the tank. It's I think 160, 170 gallons, including the sump.
Okay.
So 4.5 foot, 2 foot by 2 foot. So pretty standard dimensions. As you can see, the main source of lighting, I've gone back to radiums. I've gone back to halides. I
Oh wow.
did the XR30 Gen 4 Pros. I did them for 5 years ish on this tank, and it's just not the same. I mean, I think you simply can't beat halides. I love them. I think they're great. So I've done that swap back, and so now I'm running 250-watt bulbs, and it's been great. I think the corals have responded really well. The tank seems to enjoy it, so I'm happy.
Mhm.
But in terms
Yeah, we
of what I'm running, it's pretty simple. There's a couple of MP40s for flow. There's a tons pump in the back here. And then the sump is very simple. The sump I've stopped running socks. I was running them for a while, but I've simplified that. So it's really just the skimmer, and then that's just all live rock, and it's just a huge sort of cryptic zone of live rock. That's been in there for a few years now, so there's all sorts of stuff going and growing and having fun down there. And then I've got a UV sterilizer. I think that's more just the
Mhm.
PTSD of what the last version of this tank did. So I'm just keeping that going. Um, and then in terms of the fancy equipment, the only thing I've got running is a KH Guardian. But as you can see, I this is how I'm dosing elk at the moment. Is a bottle with elk solution, and I just pour a bit in the sump. I do need to get the dosing on that setup, but it's very simple. There's nothing fancy. There's nothing flash. I've got a couple of unusual fish. Some butterflies, some nice antheas,
Oh wow, yeah, beautiful.
a trio of hawkfish.
Yeah, it's looking nice and clean, man. Like, so you definitely are off to like a really good start. Like, as I look at, the colors are coming through. The sand's nice and clean. The tank looks clean. It does have that simple, sort of, like I'm not gonna do anything over the top. I'm just gonna do what it takes to run a good reef and hone in on that, as Troy Lee mentioned last episode, the KISS method of just kind of keeping things as simple as possible.
Hmm.
And I can already tell just by looking at it from my vantage point that that's what you're doing. Now you did mention that, of course, but the halides to me, um, and T5s, if you kind of bulk them together, I think if there's ever a problem on your reef, if you can just like get your salinity right, get your water right, make sure that your RODI, all that stuff is in check, and then go and put like old school lighting back on, to me, like that to me helps to drive success. Um, the LEDs can be tricky. So what I did is I can't even mess with mine unless I take them to a Wi-Fi, because I discontinued
Hmm.
internet at my house because I just don't need it. And so I'm not
Yeah,
accessing Wi-Fi. So I've got it set on a program, and that's it. I can't mess with it now. And so
yeah,
I think that's the
yeah.
problem with the LEDs, is it's fighting the temptation to play around and tune the different colors is just overwhelmingly hard not to do.
Yeah, I agree. And, I used schedules from, I think I was using the Worldwide Corals schedule with a bit more blue at the start and the end of the day, just for that sort of pop, because I do like, I've got some Zoas and I like having some pop for them. But the halides are just, it's easier. I turn them on, they come on for, I think I run them for about 5 hours a day. That seems to do all right at the moment. I may increase that length as I get some more acros in there, but it does well. And I mean, the tank looks pretty clean. I'm pretty happy with how it is, but there are always issues like this spot of the sand here that has some cyano every other week, but I don't care. It's just this little strip of sand here. You can sort of see some of the little remnants there where there's a bit of cyno, and that crops up every other week. But it's just a part of reefing. It's not something that I'm going to go out of my way to chase. I don't stress about it. I've got
Mhm.
this sort of fuzzy algae, as you can see, that grows over most of the rocks. It's died off in a lot of parts and it's cleaning up, but that's just, I think, been a process of cycling. I did buy recently a collector's little tuxedo urchin, and he's been just going to town. You can see this sort of
Mhm.
this white portion of rock here. That's
Sure.
all him in the last sort of week, and so that was a really fantastic grab. But I got that because I thought it would be cool, not because I care about having to get rid of this algae. It was just something that I haven't kept before. And I just, I went, they're little, they're not going to be too bulldozery, so let's give it a go.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, especially when you have the ability, like, so when you have sand, I love sand, and the reason why I love sand is because I love what you can like jam in the sand and
Mm.
what it brings. I mean, Troy Lee mentioned last episode how he has a sand sifting goby. I think one of the diamond sand sifting gobies, and they're notorious for clouding up the tank, but when you keep Acropora, it's like absolutely like a constant feed that's going on all day. And then
Mm.
he's, getting into all the different invertebrates that you can keep, the cucumbers that can turn over the sand, all of the different critters. To me, that's something that I love about sand. I'm just not at a stage of where I can do it right now. Okay, a
Mm.
pair of diamond gobies. Yeah, I just can't do it right now because like I needed to get on top of like what you're talking about with the algae. Like I needed to get on top of that. And for me, I just did not, I needed the flow to be kicked up, as hard as I could handle it. So I know I'll get around the corner on it. But well done, man. I mean, I love the butterflies, gorgeous, man. And then that's some type of anthias right there, right?
So that's a sunburst anthea. This is actually
Uh-huh.
one of probably not to sort of
It's a cool ass
uh,
angel, isn't it?
yes. So that's one of I think three in the hobby currently. So that's what's called a narcosis angelfish,
Oh
and
wow,
I
gorgeous.
inherited this. I inherited this from a friend who shut down and got out of the hobby. He bought this guy, I think, probably
Woo.
8 or 9 years ago. So he would be at least 9, 10 years old. And
Wow.
yeah, the only other person that I'm aware of, there might be a collector or two in Japan, but Andrew Polo Reef, he has a pair in one of his tanks, I'm pretty sure. But in terms of unusual fish, that this is also a hybrid of a Burgesi butterfly and a Tinkery butterfly. So this is a very unusual species as well, and that was sort of one of those reasons why I did focused on the fish first, because I've never seen a hybrid available in Australia in memory, and these guys, anything aside from a Burgesi, which can be locally caught, come up. I've seen a Mitratus, that's once I've seen in the last 15 years, and then Tinkery I've seen 2 or 3 times. So getting access to some of these fish is quite difficult.
Yeah, that's like so that's wow. Like okay, so and then Dom, if my memory serves me correctly, you were also weren't you into Rassus a little bit too?
Yes, yeah, I used to. I also have a very big thing for RAS as well.
I thought so. I
And
thought so.
yeah, there was a decision that was made early in this tank's life, or in this iteration of this tank's life, where I decided between was I going to go back and do flashes and fairy RAS again, or was I going to do something else? And the opportunity came up to get a very, very small baby mystery wrasse, who's currently disappeared. And so I sort of
Mhm.
switched gears a bit because I love mystery wrasse. They're sort of almost one of my favorite fish, but they can be very aggressive towards other wrasse species. So in choosing the mystery wrasse, I've sort of limited my ability to keep other wrasse in the tank. And I'm okay with that decision because I mean, if he decides to show his face, he is just a gorgeous little fish. They have stunning colors. They have, and that's the other thing I really like about the fish that I choose is the personalities. I really go for what might not be the prettiest fish, but they're very personable. Like like the hawkfish. I have always adored hawkfish. I've had a long nose for I think he's 4 or 5 years ish old now, and then I added a pair of flame hawks recently, and you know they get along great, and they're not bothered by the long nose, but they're great personalities. They're lots of fun to watch, and that sort of pretty fish are great, but I also like the sort of ugly personable fish too.
Yeah, that's definitely room for all of them. I tell you what, I love mystery wrasse too, man. That's funny that you mentioned that. I had one that actually got chased literally out of the tank and then to his demise by an arceye, the
Oh,
meanest
really?
fish, the meanest fish I ever came across in my entire life. We called him Sketch. But yeah, that fish was there was nothing could I couldn't put anything in the tank. Like he's so mean. So yeah, he ended up going. I can't remember who caught him, but yeah, he was definitely not so friendly. I think my buddy Matt might have put him out in his tub that he has. like an outdoor like reef tub. But anyway, man. Okay, so no, that's amazing. I love that you're showcasing so many amazing fish, and like as far as acros are concerned, they grow in, and you can, if with you having the availability for them,
Mm,
procuring and putting your resources towards another passion, which is the fish. I think that's cool, and that's it's definitely not like the norm these days. So I applaud you for sort of taking a different approach, and the patience it takes to do that, because we tend to want to load up and spend all of our resources towards the acros, and then we just sort of piece in fish over time. But I like how
mm.
I like your approach there. Definitely it's very cool, and it's gorgeous, man. Like, well done.
Yeah. I might drop out for a second. I'll just flick the halides on just to make it a little bit more nicer, and we can sort of see what the difference looks like. So if I drop out,
Oh, hell yeah.
I do apologize.
So hello everybody, I see you out there. Appreciate you jumping in. Dom's got the radiums, the old school 250 watt. I
Okay,
imagine that it's single
I think
ends.
I've returned.
And then those reflectors
So
too are,
they're
still.
coming on now, and they'll do their slow sort of warm up where it goes from that gross yellow. You can see it sort of everything looks really weird and green as they slowly warm up, and you get that because these are radiums, so they'll go that bluer color. But yeah, like any halide, they start at that sort of real yellow, real sort of 5-10K, and yeah, as you can see, that side's much
Here it comes.
and yeah, and
Here it
then you get the
comes.
yeah, and then you get that sort of crisp and that's the one thing that I've never seen in any other form of lighting is just how crisp a halide looks and how a tank with a halide looks. It's just it's yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I'll rave about it for hours on end.
Well, you get like you get this shimmering effect, and if you're a
Mm,
shimmer person, like it is just something that, like, once you see the shimmer under like what you're looking at there, there's nothing you can do. A Kessel can definitely throw down some shimmer, but it
mm.
does not pack like what the halides bring in terms of the heat and the punch, and there's a temperature exchange that I'm onto with um, T5s and with metal halides that I believe is in the spectrums that just can't be captured with the LEDs, and it's some sort of like a radiation type of
Mm.
exchange, and
Yeah,
I just
I
think
do
that
agree.
that's what's missing.
Mm.
So it's
And
gorgeous. Look at that. Look at that.
yeah, and so it becomes a completely different tank once the halides turn on. You can actually see the extent of the coralline on the rocks, and you can sort of see that algae growth a bit better now. So like there's just this thin layer of fuzz. I mean, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't seem to affect the acros. They're pretty happy. They do their own thing. Everything. Unfortunately, just due to phone cameras and stuff, everything looks a bit bleached out, but it doesn't on in
Oh, that's
person.
nice.
Um, and that's the other thing I think people forget about is the fish. Under halides, the fish look a
Oh
thousand times
man,
better.
yeah.
It's not just the corals. It's the colors of the fish just stand out so much nicer.
Mhm.
Especially with fish like the butterfly that is sort of a silver white and black fish. You don't under the blue LEDs. It's not a very nice looking fish, or it's not as nice as it currently looks. Where that striking contrast really stands out.
Like I said, that energy exchange that the sun provides, um that like in the human, we need melatonin in order, in order for us to be, it's a health aspect. And you
Mm.
wonder, is there an aspect of that that is missing that is brought in metal halides that's bringing out these like colors, and could it be like it's the amino acids or the, you know, the proteins or something that's going on in the fish that's allowing
Mm,
these colors to like sort of come forward. You know, certainly diet would be one aspect, and I'm sure you do really well there, and you know, definitely talk about how you feed. But I also think that the lighting, like you're suggesting, you know, with the metal halides, I think that's big for fish.
mm.
You know, and so yeah, that's my take on it. But yeah, if you want to jump into, you know, like what you're feeding, that would be kind of cool to learn, because I'm sure
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
definitely putting some
I mean,
good food in there.
it's sort of it's a bit of a hodgepodge. I do a bit of a mix of everything. I should mention also why there's this hideous bit of covering over these
Mushrooms,
zoas.
right?
Someone
Oh,
is
okay.
rather aggressive. Someone is rather
Oh,
aggressive in their love of zoas. So I wasn't sure as to how that was going to go, those additions, and it hasn't gone as well as I would have liked. So this is the covering to protect the zoas from
ah.
being eaten by a certain someone.
Yeah, I thought it
Um,
was to prevent floaters, but now I see what you're talking about. So
Yes, yeah. But
true.
in terms of the food that I feed, it's not anything overly exciting. It's I have some different I try and feed variety. That's I think one of the big things is even if it's boring food, if there's a lot of variety, you cover more bases. And so, it's something as simple as just some ocean nutrition brine strip flakes. And I've got, Prime Reef, I've got a different brand. I've got what's the brand? New Life Spectrum. I've got pellets. I feed mysis. I feed Artemia. I've got some like angel mix and some other different frozen foods. And so, while I'm not feeding, the most interesting or any of those sort of fun self homemade mixes, it's it's the variety. There's also nori that I feed as well, and so I sort of just pump the tank full of just a random assortment of things.
Yeah, which, you know, the funny thing is then that nutrition transfers over to the acros, you know, down
Hmm.
the line. So, you know, that's the color driver in my perspective, is having a variety of diverse type of foods available, that are rich in, you know, amino acids and lipids and, you know, all the fatty acids and so forth, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
omegas.
high in the what I can't remember the I think it's carotid or something. That's
It's the
the red
carotenoids.
pigment. Yeah, yeah, the for the red pigments and all those sorts of things. And I think that in combination with because I don't dose anything special. Literally, the only thing that I dose is some at the moment some Coral Essentials potassium iodide. And
Okay.
I just drop a few, just do a few drops of that every evening. Dosing there is, and I've done ICPs probably every few months, but it's more just to sort of see what's going on. And every ICP that I've got back has all been in the green range. The nutrients, they tell me the nutrients are high, but like I don't, I think the phosphate's around 0.01 ish and the nitrates are 10 to 20. But, those sorts of things that aren't really on my radar. It's do the acros look all right? Are they coloring up? Are they happy? And if they're not, then potentially I'll look at what might be causing it. But if they're happy, why mess with what's working?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and by the way, those parameters like are kind of considered low parameters by today's standards.
Hmm.
So they're really not even like in US at least. I mean, you know, based on a lot of the direction it seems that many are trying to take their reefs. But you know, I don't get. I've talked to, you know, a lot about nutrients. I don't really think it matters. It's like
Hmm.
trace minerals. You know, I think that if it's there, it's there. If it's available, it's available. If it's there
Yeah,
for the pickings, it's there for the pickings. You know, that's
yeah, yeah.
it's
That
like
that's exactly right. Um, I should just mention, Rich. They're 250 watts. They're both 250 watt bulbs. And I think these bulbs are probably they'd be well over 12 months old at this stage. They'd almost be 15 months old or so. I don't think that the halides, the radiums, need to be replaced every year on the dot. I think that, given that their run times, I can't remember off the top of my head, it's like 1,000 or 2,000 hours at 5-ish hours a day. That can last about 2 or 3 years.
Oh, heck yeah.
But I think one of the other big tricks for this tank that's really made my life a lot easier is this is all on auto water changes. So you're right.
5 hours, right?
Yeah, 5 hours per day. So I think they run from about 1 till 6-ish. I might
Perfect.
bump that up as I get some more acros, but 5 hours seems to be the good period. And then the Radeon runs for about 12-ish hours a day. But that Radeon is not the permanent solution for the supplemental lighting. I do want to get a couple of bars to
Mhm.
swap that Radeon out and then add a couple of 4-foot bars across their LED bars to do the supplementing in terms of the blues for outside the halide period. But that's just a task I need to get round to and haven't yet. The Radeon works for the moment, so it is what it is. But just to jump back, I do automatic water changes, so I get, I think, 10%, 15% over a week. Every hour it changes. I think it's about a liter of water, and I
Are you?
get. You go. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, are you using natural seawater? Are you using mixed salt water with your own RODI, or what's your setup there?
So I was using Red Sea Blue Bucket for the longest time.
Okay.
That was what I ran the shallow tank on. That was what I ran the cube on. If I was to go back to artificial, back to Red Sea Blue Bucket. But
Mhm.
being so close to the ocean and having access to such fantastic natural salt water, in the room next to me in the garage, I've got 1,000 liter IBC, or I think it's about 254-ish gallons.
Mhm.
That every 3-ish months, a guy comes with a truck with natural salt water and delivers it. And so I get my salt water delivered, so I don't have to mix salt water. I don't have to, there's not that wastage of RO, from the RO process and any of the rejection rates and all that sort of stuff. So I get natural salt water delivered, and it's pretty much on tap for the tank, at a very consistent rate. And I think that's another thing that sort of differs in the Australian versus the sort of US scene is that because we have access to such high quality natural salt water, the mentality here and the very common thing here in Australia is everyone does water changes, and everyone's moved to having automatic water changes where you do slow small amounts just consistently throughout the day all of the time.
Now, do you need to correct for salinity, top off, that kind of thing, or do you just run a lower salinity, or how do you sort of combat that?
So I think the salinity runs just a touch higher, um, but that I will correct that in the IBC. So the water will get delivered, and then I'll test the salinity of what's been delivered. And if I need to add 10 liters, 100 liters of RO, I'll add that and let that mix up, and then that comes in at its 1025-ish, and that's what happens. And then obviously I've got an auto top up, so I still get the evaporation throughout the day,
Okay.
and still
Okay.
replacing that with RO. I've got the little section here, which is not a huge amount, but that's where the RO top off is, and I make my own RO and all that sort of stuff. So there's still RO and there's still top off, and you've still got to do all of that. But just in that background, there's just a constant feed of natural salt water, so you get all those elements that come with it. So that's probably why my ICPs always return with the right level of elements in them, without having to do any dosing. It's the Coralline's uptaking, it would be uptaking a shitload of various elements, calcium, all that sort of stuff. But with that sort of 15% constantly available throughout the week, it
Mhm.
doesn't really have too much draw. And as I add more acros, I'm probably going to need to increase that. I might go up to 20-25%
Mhm.
a week, and I might have to get water delivered more frequently. But on the plus side to that, it's not. It means I won't be buying I'm not going to be having to buy various bottles or, doing any dose corrections and those sorts of things. It just makes life really easy.
So then at that point, you are if you're just going to up, so you're going to up your percentage exchange to accommodate your growth and your uptake. Is if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, yeah. To a certain point, I probably
Mhm.
wouldn't go any higher than, that 20 to 25%. So there will be a point where I'll have to get the calcium reactor out and I'll have to set that back up and
Okay.
have that running. I'm a big fan of calcium reactors. I think there's a lot of talk around calc these days, which is something that I've never really looked into. It may be
Mhm.
something where I do the dosing with calc and have the calcium reactor going, to sort of offset each other in terms of the pHs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean,
But
or
it won't be like
just
a situation where it's just water changes. There will come a time where I have to, add the calcium reactor back. Potentially do some calc dosing. I might have to do some, extra supplementation for calcium or magnesium and that sort of thing. But those minor and those trace elements, aside from the iodine, which usually tests low for me, is really gonna I'm gonna aim for that to be covered by the water changes.
yeah, it's just like a Lugol solution, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty much just Lugol's.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do that. I actually dose it in my every day in my shake too. So I use two drops in the Reef every week or so, and then I try to do
Hmm.
2 drops in my shake every day.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean it's good. It's good crossover. A lot of these things that I dose for my body, I cross over to the Reef. It's not what we're getting into today, but yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, Lugol's
Hmm.
is excellent, and I remember um, Abe from Coral Euphoria when asked what he dosed. I think that was all he ever really leaned on from a trace mineral perspective, outside of water changes. So
Hmm.
that's it's a
Yeah,
testament.
and
Like the guy's successful. His tanks were incredible.
oh yeah, he was fantastic. I loved watching his videos whenever he'd upload videos,
Absolutely.
and his content was always amazing, and those tanks were just phenomenal. So yeah, yeah, it's
Mhm.
sort of it is, and I think that's the other thing too is a lot of people aren't really following, or it feels like they're not following a wide variety of people these days. So you end up with these sort of, not to say like a monoculture, but like a monoculture of, I like the way this one person does thing, and then I'm not going to really look at how everyone else is doing it, or how does the hobby vary in Europe compared to the US compared to Australia, because there are all sort of key elements of all three of those locations that are
Mhm.
quite different. You can go back to the water changes. Here water changes are the thing that you do. There's very few tanks that do no water changes. There's not a lot of people running the Triton system. There's very few people running the moonshiners system, because I mean obviously importing bottles of liquid is very expensive, so moonshiners is about 2 or 3 times the cost here that it is in the US, which makes it fairly prohibitive. um
I mean, we had
but
a hell of a time trying to get a lot of the Aquaforce range in
mm,
Australia, back in the day. So, I can recall. But like it makes complete sense. I think it's like gardening, man. Like you look at your area, right? And like so I'm close to the Atlantic. Now, my situation at the Atlantic, even if I was on the Gulf, I'm in Florida, but I probably wouldn't. I'm close enough that literally I can drive myself to the coast at any point. In fact, there's a place that's probably 45 minutes away from me that I could drive to, and they have a tap that goes out into the ocean, and it's kind of like a gas fill up station, but it's like a saltwater fill up station where you
oh
can
yeah, yep.
access, the water as a resident locally. But and it's something that I think probably the gentleman or whomever, the business owner, probably has a system in place where they're taking that water and running it through a series of UV exchange and
Mhm.
probably carbon and things of this nature before it hits your tank. So, but to me, it makes perfect sense to utilize your local area, and I think that we should do that like community thing as far as frags are concerned and backing up, our frags into other systems, into our friends' tanks. Um, there's just some of that missing, and I think
Yeah.
that that's where I really want to see sort of the hobby come back. Of like making sure that number one, my first frag is me. My second frag is my reef homie.
Mm,
Like my local guy, and then like and then my other and then from there maybe I'll go to market and sell a
mm.
frag here or there if I can. But I think it's just important that we sort of have that mindset, because once you lose these corals, especially here, you just don't come. They don't come again.
Yeah.
You don't see them again. Like
Yeah.
ice
Yeah.
fire echinata, you don't see it.
Yeah. Or, you look at the purple monster, for instance, back in the RC days and those sorts of things. Purple monster was everywhere. Everyone had a piece of that. Nowadays, it's, I see posts where it goes for absurd amounts of money, and there's, only a handful of people that sort of have it or want to share it around because it's become that sort of rare piece. And yeah, I completely agree. That's one thing I think also the Australian hobby sort of suffers from a bit is there's not really that sense of community. There's no local forums here anymore. They died probably 8 years ago, 9 years ago now. There's really only Facebook groups, and I won't even get started on those. I think they're an absolute detriment to the hobby. I
Hmm.
don't really like them. Uh, I unfortunately take part in them because that's where all of the Australian hobby is. There's sort of, I think, three main Facebook groups here, and if you're not on those, you're really not a part of the Australian hobby. There's and the Aussies on forums are few and far between. It's me. There's a couple other guys. There's Great Barrier Reef South. He's on Humble Fish as well. He's a
Hmm.
serial pest. He sort of he this him and I and our interactions very much remind me of Andrew back in the day and that sort of thing. And aside from that, I can count on one hand how many Australians I come across on forums. It's just I don't know what happened. I think I think
It's
with the
sad.
shutdown of those two, I think I mean it sort of makes sense because the reason that the main forum here shut down was due to a whole lot of rivalry and over moderation and all sorts of nasty interactions, and people basically just told this forum to get stuffed and moved away from it. And the other one was sort of a more small forum, and it just sort of, as the Facebook groups cropped up, there was less interaction, and it just sort of gradually died out over time. But yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, there's a couple of Discord groups. Yeah, has just been popped up. I'm a part of those. There's Reef Beef. There's Salty AF,
Mhm.
I think it is. They're sort of two of the main sort of reefing discords I'm part of. But that they're sort of, I think the discords are slightly nicer ground because you can have a bit more of that journaling, that sort of you have your thread where you detail what's going on. I've made this change and let's see what happens, and you can go back and you can look at it. Reefy AF, sorry, that's what I meant, not salty AF. um, and those are really great communities. But I just think the way that Facebook works and Instagram as well, in that there's no detailing, there's no I've made this change and this is what's happened, and we can look at what the process is over time, and we can go back and we can go, okay, well, it's been for the better or it's been for the worse. It's everyone posts their best foot forward. It's I've cleaned the tank, I've scrubbed the glass, I've blown all the rocks off, I've done a flocculant treatment to get all the bits out of the water and all of that sort of stuff, and now the tank is nice and sparkly. But you don't get any of that sort of negative update. I've always been very forward about when things go wrong. I'll be the first person to post that something's happened that I don't like because it needs to be detailed. It can be a lesson to someone else. I do like what Sanjay is doing at the moment with his Instagram. And him rebuilding his tank up, and he's been posting sort of irregular updates about how that process has been going. And I saw one, I think it was yesterday or in the last couple of days, where he's finally got some fish and some corals back in the tank. But he
Yeah,
was
I
posting
saw that
updates
on
where it was,
Instagram.
yeah, like videos of just. I remember seeing a video and it was just like slime everywhere from that massive die off. And it was really unfortunate what happened for him. But he detailed all of that, and you just don't get that with Facebook or Instagram really, unless people are willing to do that. But it's not, people are not really willing to do that because you don't get sponsorship out of that kind of thing. And that's probably a bit cynical of me, but I'm a bit
Oh,
cynical in that regard.
well, see, I think that's important that we talk about like the difference, really. So I'll jump into the fact that in 2016 I was approached by Aquaforest, and I was
Mm,
sponsored by Aquaforest. But what a lot of folks didn't know is that behind the scenes, I was managing their Facebook group, I was managing their Reef Central group and their Reef to Reef group, and I was also going on private messenger and guiding
mm,
hundreds of people on their probiotic system. And so when it comes to the sponsorship, I earned every bit of every bucket of salt and every supplement and everything that they
mm,
sent my way. I earned it well beyond what it was. But I nowadays I think there's crossover into influencer and sponsorship. And I think a true sponsorship should be like, hey, like, for example, what are you doing to support that product, not just show off,
yeah.
right? That's I think the dividing line for me, at least. And so while I'm not like I'm not trying to promote either, I'm horribly disappointed with scrolling myself. So I'll put stuff out there, but I'm
Mm,
not big into scrolling. I'm not big into internet, and really, I sort of always have followed the beat of my own drum anyway. But
mm,
um, when it comes to it, you're right. Like with Facebook, I'm not on it, by the way. But when it comes to Instagram, which I am, sometimes you're scrolling and then it's like the algorithm starts shooting you other things that are not necessarily things I'm really interested in looking at.
mm,
And then that goes into the area for me of like it's discouraging for me to even want to be looking at that platform. And so for me, I like the idea of like, and I'm a little bit older, right? But to log in somewhere and see the exchange, it's there, it's time stamped. I can have a cup of coffee if somebody's like, well, what are you doing to do that on a journal, for example? And then I could go
mm,
back and like sit down and articulate my mind, whereas you don't get that. I mean, heck, nobody even mentions a comment on these things. It's all just a like or and then
mm.
it bodes the question of, are these even real people? And so for me, that was like sort of where I was at with it. And I'm not here to talk about like sort of my personal stuff, but in my world, that's not something that I hold all that valuable to me, you know. But it's a necessary if you're going to be in this, particularly from a marketing standpoint. If you're going to be a company, you almost have to these days. So it's
Yeah,
it's
I
sort
mean
of
it's yeah, I agree. It's a necessary evil, really. You have to do these things, and I mean, I do. I do. It's not to say that I completely dislike it. I really do like going on Instagram and seeing, people's tanks, that aren't necessarily on the forums or Facebook, and seeing those. Who doesn't love seeing gorgeous pictures of acros or these stunning colonies or all of these fish and that sort of thing. Like I don't think it's necessarily all evil or all bad. I just think that it misses out on a lot of things, and I think that sense of community is one of the big things. Is it's hard to achieve. That it's not I log on to the internet and I go onto the forum, and I spend my morning and I catch up with everyone's threads, see what they're doing, check in with threads that haven't been updated for a while, and send a message and say, hey, how are you going, and all of that. But I sent them a private message just to see how they're going. Whether they get that email notification and they respond to me, or they log in and perchance see that message is, and that's up to fate whether that happens. But that's still those are still people that I spent, years interacting with, like
Mhm.
you and I, for example, since what, 2014, 2014 ish. That's
Mhm.
11 years, it's a long time to, even if you haven't met these people, like there's a lot of people I haven't met in person, but would consider friends because, you've had
Yeah.
such regular interaction with them over the years.
Yeah, I mean, you remember there was Greg, old dude. There was Matt Reef Mutt. There was Uhasi.
Hmm.
I remember usernames more so.
Yeah.
Um, but all of these were people that I would really love to catch up with if they're especially if they're still in the hobby, regardless of whether they're not in the hobby anymore. Like just to catch up. But you know, yeah, it's that all those people and that was a real pivotal point for me in my process of where I was headed with my 120 gallon reef at the time. And yeah, I mean, it's, nowadays it's, I'm much more scaled down and, but I'm enjoying it, nonetheless. I still feel like a kid in the hobby again. And I think that's what's important, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's about, and I think that the other thing too is that people don't realize these days is that burnout is very much a thing in your hobbies. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter how much you love reefing. There are days there where you want nothing to do with the tank. And, I've had plenty of those days, where you just go, literally all I can manage is to feed the fish once. And that's, that's not necessarily the best thing in the world, but there are just days where it's like that. There, with this tank, when it was going through all its things, when I was doing the restart, that was a difficult process, and there were, you know, weeks there where all I could do was come down, make sure everyone was alive, give them a little bit of food, make sure the ATO was topped up, and that was literally all I could manage. The glass wouldn't get cleaned for a month and a half, but
Mhm.
that's and that's part of that process. I've made it through. The tank is stable. It's the rock is really mature. I'm really enjoying the direction that it's gone, and you take the good with the bad, and I just don't think it's all this positive. Everything's perfect. Things go wrong, and they go wrong very quickly. And that's what I'm sure people in the hobby are sick of hearing. It goes wrong very fast, but good things take time. But people,
Mhm.
you need to harp on about it because people expect. You have these glorious tanks within a week. There's someone on one of the Facebook groups in Australia here who started his tank and within a month probably spent, I would say, 2 or 3 weeks after he set this tank up, probably spent, would have been, based on how many acros and corals he bought, probably 10K worth of coral, and just loaded this tank with coral. And everyone was very dubious watching this. You putting that much aggro in at once, that's a lot of pressure on the system in one hit. All of a sudden there's all this uptake and all of that sort of thing. And to his credit, a couple of weeks later, everything still looks really good. A month and a half later, it's still doing well. But like, this is clearly someone who knows what they're doing. He's done this before, or he's done the research, or he's got someone behind the scenes helping him achieve what's going on. But that's not how it works for 99% of people in the hobby.
No, 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 not at all. I mean,
Mm,
I tried that myself. I mean, I got some macros from day one,
mm,
and I know that there's some think topics of, like Alan and I are gonna, try to dive deeper into with time, but where you can bring that sort of that shared bacteria. Um, but like you said, if you don't know how to manage that, if you don't know how to manage like the nutrient swing, the mineral swing, and all of
mm,
that stuff that's going to ensue, because when you're talking about that much, in order for it to be happy, at least, I mean, because if it's shut down, then of course it's not going to take in anything, and
mm,
it'll be apparent in your tests. But with all of that in mind, I mean, it's doable, but it's not
mm,
realistic, and it's not realistic for the average acro keeper, in my humble opinion, to even think about keeping acros probably until a year, one and a half. Based on my experience of where I've felt like my reefs start to hit this spot, and I think there's always this spot that we hit where we just look at it and we go, "Oh yeah, we're there. I know what's
Mm,
going on. We're about to hit an upswing. Things that looked rough are coming out of dormancy, and you can just tell." And all of a sudden, the rock sort of shows itself. All of a sudden, like these little micro spawns begin to happen,
mm,
and it's a testament to that micro life, that microbiome, that's sort of settling in. And until that really happens, you're going to be in tough shape. And as you
mm,
suggested with live rock, the fastest path to stability, as far as acro keeping, to me, is having access to live rock. If you
mm,
have access to live rock, you can really make it happen. But the problem too is, in a day of sterility, like, how do you get there? And how do you get there when you don't have access? Right? And so I
mm.
think that's what the difference of back then is versus now. Has the hobby gotten any more difficult? I think it's actually has, but should it have gotten easier? It probably should
Mm.
have. The information pipeline has, the ability to communicate and share has, but in fact, the ability for you and I to be here versus on the SPS forum doing this right now has improved greatly, right? But
Yeah.
I don't know that we've improved all that much when I look at acropora keeping.
Yeah, I look. I think when you think about it, you're absolutely right. You look at the glorious acro tanks of today versus the glorious acro tanks of 10, 15 years ago, and they're the same quality. So clearly, we haven't really, in terms of keeping those things. Obviously we've made a lot of headway in being able to spawn acros now. The works of the guys over in the UK and like Rich Ross. He's currently, I think, prepping for the spawning season in his tanks, and so, culturing acro, that obviously has come a long way. But I think people get so overwhelmed by the technology and the fun toys that you can implement on your tank that
Mhm.
you get caught up in all of these things when realistically it can be very simple. You know, You- I mean, I'm running a very simple tank. The only reason I've got the KH Guardian is because I'm atrocious when it comes to testing.
I'm so bad I don't even want to mention it. So like I won't even and I have a 25, like literally have 30 gallons of total volume to play with, and I'm still like that. So yeah, it's a testament that maybe these things are a little more resilient than we also give them credit for. I know Troy Lee was echoing that recently. I tend to agree with that they're a lot more resilient than sometimes we give them credit for. But yeah, like it is should be simple. And each person that I keep, like everybody that I've hooked up with so far has shown simplicity. And I think that's the real deal of keeping a reef keeping a nice acropora ecosystem really is driving the basics. From there, I think we can then start to branch into various different fine tuning avenues. But I think it's important that we master the basics, master, sort of the maintenance schedule and routine, and understand, I mean, it's so easy. We can get lost on just source water or having the proper salinity, and you could
Yeah,
go on a just everything's off,
yeah,
at that
yeah. I
point.
mean, yeah, you look at like the hot topic of today is pH. That wasn't what
Mhm,
anyone spoke about. That wasn't even on the radar back in those sort of RC days. It was all about nutrients. It was all about keeping your nitrates really low and your phosphate almost undetectable. That was what we all strove for. That was the achievement, was ultra low
mhm,
nutrients. You sort of dosed everything else. But nowadays it's everyone's on the case of making sure you've got high. I couldn't tell you what the pH in my tank is. Making sure you've got high pH, and we're back at ammonia dosing nowadays as well, which seems to be doing really well for some people. But that's just pure nutrient dosing. Could you imagine if you got on the SPS Keepers forum back in the day and said, "I'm dosing ammonia to get my nutrients up"? Everyone would have, pitchforks and torches got you off the
mhm.
forum.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and there's definitely something for really there's no one best way. And that's one thing that I've learned about just nature in general, is being a devout lover of all things nature. Um, you know, it just there's never a how do you put this? When you think you have the recipe, when you think you have it figured out, when you think that you're this sort of thing, that's when it will just slap you down. And so humble reefing, yes, humble is just absolutely the way to be. And I try to apply that in every way, every avenue that I could possibly think of at this stage in my life. I can't say that I was always that fellow. I can't say that I wasn't a different person in my previous existence, but right now, that's how I reef, and that's how I garden, and that's how I do life, and
Yeah.
just follow the rule of nature.
Yeah, I completely agree, and and it comes back to those how I interact with people on forums and social media, and that is my approach is I see comments, and it's the comment will be no, you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way, and that's I mean I will fully accept I don't know everything, and I could be wrong at any given
Mhm,
moment. And so whenever I suggest something, it's exactly that. It's a suggestion. It's, hey, this is what's worked for me, or this is something that I've noticed. Here's my little mind story, here's my little example, and this is what's helped me, and whether that helps you, it might not, because your system is completely different to my system. You can run two systems side by side with exactly the same gear, start them and run them in exactly the same way, but they could be very different in how they respond to things. And so to go onto a forum, and I see this regularly, people that have been reefing for little time, yeah, they have really nice tanks, and it's, well, this is the way you do it. And it's like, well, no, it's not actually the way you do it. It's just one of the ways you can do it.
mhm.
And so it's, yeah, it's sort of, and without those journals, it's hard to, it's hard to not fact check, but it's hard to gauge what this person's reefing history, or what their capabilities are. That you might go back, and a couple of posts ago they've shown a picture of their tank and it looks phenomenal, but it may actually turn out that they went and spent several $1,000s and loaded it all up and took a nice picture for it, and it's actually it's actually all died, and they actually don't know what they're doing, but because they've got this one nice picture and there's no other history, you can't actually tell what this person, what their capabilities are, whether they actually know what they're talking about, or they're just regurgitating what they've been told, which may also be incorrect. I don't know how many posts I see of people talking about ick, where it's, oh, just feed garlic, garlic will cure your ick. And it's like, it's been definitively proven multiple times that garlic does not cure ick, but somehow this idea still persists.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these like special formulas, and really what it gets where the metal, where the metal sort of meets the road, or the rubber meets the road, if you will, is
Mm,
to me is really, let's just get down to the root cause of everything. Like, to me, I look at, what are you feeding your fish, and are you promoting a good gut biome? Are you
mm,
promoting a good food source? And if that that then parlays into a healthier fish, and then the healthier fish parlays into a healthier ecosystem, because all mouths at that point are then involved in what comes about afterwards, right? And so, to me, I just look at it like that. It's real easy. Just drive health. Like, it's like your
mm.
body, like, truly, it's what you put in, right?
Yeah.
And so, if we're putting good inputs into our reef, and we've got sort of filtration, and like, you're using a water exchange system that's going to offset, but you're also using a protein skimmer. Your nutrients are, by today's standards, normal, relatively low.
Yeah.
So you look at that and you'd say, "Psh, perfect. There,
Yeah.
perfect."
Yeah. Unless the fish or the acros or any of the corals are telling me something different, I'm not really worried. And if they are telling me something different, I'm not going to go out and change three things immediately. I'm going to do,
Mm, key.
do a couple of tests, check various things. If something looks off, it has the salinity crept up. I'll check that. Is there something? Has the alk suddenly changed? I might check the nutrients. I might send off an ICP and just see if there's some sort of obvious answer and go from there. But I'm not going to get that ICP back and it's going to be, let's say barium is red, my barium's low. I'm not going to go out and buy a bottle of barium and dose barium to bring the barium back up, because that's probably not what the cause is, a lot of the time. If And I think this was something that Lee was saying last week, was I'll just do a water change. I'll go out and I'll just do 20% and just do a big water change. And that solves, it could be maybe there's an overload of a specific strain of bacteria. You bring that down, you do something like that. It could be something, anything. And just do a big water change. And that I find solves a lot of problems. And there are ways where you can do no water changes and you do, all that testing, that moonshiners, that Triton, and it works well for a good portion of people that do it. But I just think it's so much effort. And, I'll be the first to admit that I ran Zero, that 2 foot cube back in the day, that was a Zeovit cube. I
Mhm.
did the stones. I was shaking them twice a day. I was dosing, the Zero back, sponge power, all of those good things. Did I know what any of them had in them? Was I doing ICPs to test all of the macro and the micronutrients and elements? No, I wasn't doing any of that. I was just following those instructions and looking at what the acros were doing. And, they responded well to those things, so I kept doing them. And if Zeovit was more available here and wasn't stupidly expensive, I'd probably go back to that system. I really enjoyed it. I liked the tinkering that came with it. I liked the little
Mhm.
bits and pieces that you could do, and all of those fun little things. But I never took it to the level that some of the Zeovit tanks took it to, where they were dosing that level of copper, where you got those really pale colors and those really pastels, and some of those tanks looked phenomenal. But I'd rather that more saturated appearance, and that was what I had back in the day. The colors in my tank were really saturated, but I was still running that Zeovit system. The nutrients were low, and it was just, it worked, and I wasn't testing all kinds of things. And yeah, there were no ICPs. I mean, I do ICP, at least just left a comment about ICPs. I do them because I find them interesting. I just like seeing the numbers. I like, I'm an engineer by training. I did civil engineering, so I'm very much a maths nerd and very much into looking at things. And whether I actually do anything with the information is almost beyond the point. It's just, I like having the information. I don't, I'm not like, I've never bought Triton bottles. I'm not going to go out and buy obscure elements to dose if it's low. It's just, it's kind of fun. I like that part. I like the testing in terms of just knowing those numbers. But I'm not gonna go chasing it. I'm not gonna go, oh, this is a bit low or this is a bit high, or if everything seems kind of out of whack or something, maybe I'll go and buy a small bucket of Red Sea salt and just do a change with that and just sort of reset everything, bring it back down to a simple baseline. It's not as complex as I think a lot of people make it out to be. And yes, it's not necessarily an easy hobby, but it's not a difficult hobby either. It's the consistency, I think, that trips a lot of people up.
Mhm.
It's, if you're not doing something consistent, then it can go wrong a lot quicker. And that was one of the reasons probably why this took so long. This version of this tank took a while to mature, is because when I originally restarted it, it was, I didn't have the auto water changes, and so it was getting a water change, a 10% water change. Sometimes it was once a week, sometimes it was every second or third month. But I didn't have any corals in there, so it wasn't like there was anything being impacted. It just probably meant that the maturing process maybe took just a little bit longer. But with that automatic water changes, it takes that consistency out of my hands and means that it occurs anyway. And I think you need to
Mhm.
know what your own shortcomings are, and you need to fully
Right.
accept that they are what they are. And no matter how much goodwill or motivation you have, if it's a shortcoming, and mine is routine testing, and it's making sure I get my water changes done. So, having the automatic water changes, it just removes that from my responsibility. All I have to do now is make sure that my IBC is full and there's water for it to change, and that the salinity is at the right level. Because sometimes your dosing pumps get slightly out of whack, and maybe you're taking a little bit more water than you're putting in. And so I do a calibration of the pumps every probably once a year, 6 months. And that's just to make sure that they're changing the water at the same rate, and I'm not getting that,
Hmm.
residual salt creep up or down because of, one's slightly out of whack. Do I need to do that? No, but that's sort of something simple that I can do just to make sure everything's running smoothly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it is that consistency in the maintenance protocol. I think it's also too, man, like time. I mean, are
Mm,
you taking a minute or two to like spend time? And there could be something to philosophical reefing. I've talked about it a lot. Where there's this unspoken thing that can't be scientifically measured. There's no way of there's no data, right? There's no numbers,
mm.
there's no nothing, and that leaves a math engineering mind a little like whoa, I don't know about all that. But it's sort of this ability to try to tap in and be able to communicate on a different level, and that's something that I really strive for. A top down viewing generally is something that I try to do all the time personally, as much as I can. But I think it's just that general time of spending time with those animals, with the fish. If that's what is linking you into that system, or sort of getting you engaged, then that's important. Whatever is that driving source, because I think ultimately it's spending a few moments, regardless of what your approach is, regardless of whether you do it this way, that way, or the other. To me, I think it's very important to spend time. And
Mm,
observation to me has always been if anybody who's ever asked me along my journey of like, what do you do? And I've always said I observe. I
yeah,
observe. I'm
yeah,
here to meet the demands of the system and to serve the demands of the system. And if I can do that and serve the system as a whole, not the fish, not the corals, but the system as a whole,
mm,
generally to me, I've felt like good things follow. Right. And again, we all have our different ways of going about it, but in the end, observation can lead you to testing. Observation can lead you to a gut instinct. It can lead you
yeah.
to, this is what I feel. Let me validate this. Let me see if there's a test I can run to go ahead and
Mm,
validate this. Bless you, by the way. And so I don't know that, I don't know that that's for everyone. But to me, I kind of want to try to figure it out
mm,
before I figure it out. If you know what I
yeah.
mean. Like I want to deeply go into the dynamics of it, and then I want to go and test, and then I want to go and then do the water change if necessary or what have you.
Mm.
So I don't know if you want to comment on that. On do you get enough time to engage your system? Do you feel pretty good about that, or do you think that's important? What's your take?
Oh, I am completely in agreement with you. I think I think it also goes probably maybe even one step further in that, I'm bringing it, and I'm probably harping on about this point by now, but bringing it back to that forums, it's not just about observing your system; it's about observing other people's systems as well. It's, you're following along those journals, and someone posts their problem and their solution and how that's progressed, and then they've treated it, and you go, well, hang on a second, my problem kind of looks like their problem. What did they do? What have they identified? And then that can help sort of shortcut your ability to solve your own problem, in that you've recognized something's wrong, but you've also recognized that, at least 20 other people have probably had that same issue in the past somewhere else. And so,
Mhm.
you spend that time and you notice your system, and you notice what the ebbs and the flows are, and you do that observation, and you go, oh, hang on a second, something doesn't quite look right. And you either do something proactive about it, or you just sort of let it ride. And there's been times where you let something ride and it rights itself. It could have just had a bad day for whatever reason, or something was just a bit skew and wasn't going right. Or it progresses a little bit further, and you go, okay, here's now a point where I need to step in, and we need to start doing something to try and fix that problem. And that comes from your observational skills of your tank. But then there is also that not to say pattern recognition, but that recognition of, hang on a second, I remember reading something about that, or someone did an article, or there was a
Mhm.
video on it, and it kind of lines up with what my issue is. And let's go back and let's look at what they did and what they identified. And, that means that maybe you can skip doing the six different things, and you can sort of jump to one solution that fits, and you test that sort of that thing first, and you go through that sort of identification process first, and that almost can solve that problem very quickly, as opposed to, oh, okay, well, let's start at point A and we'll go B and we'll go C, and we'll knock through the various options that we can to get to potentially the same solution. And yeah, I agree. I think observation is probably one of the most it's the most important parameter in the hobby, beyond lighting, beyond flow, all of that sort of thing. If you don't know what you're looking at, none of anything else matters.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like, so it's like kind of like the digression and like in words, so you get into social media and there's no explanation. Whereas
Hmm.
before, you might log in and, and you might say, today I changed, carbon, I did a sump reset. And then the
Hmm.
cool thing I always felt like with journaling and sort of putting those things down, it's time stamped. So if I
Hmm.
was ever in question, like I might go and look at the reef and my first gut instinct is, something's off, or the water has a tinge to it. Maybe it's time to change carbon. And I'm like, oh shit, when did I change that last? Because I'm not very good at taking a piece of masking tape and just magic marker. It's so easy. But yeah, these easy things fail me. So I could always go back and look at my journal and say, oh yeah, that's been exactly 5 weeks ago or whatever. But it's sort of that gets lost these days to me. And I always appreciated the ability to go back and revisit my journal and remember, like, what was I doing, or something looks off. Well, did I dose something back then? And sure enough, I dosed boron or something, like whatever for a red. Um, you know what I mean? Like just stupid stuff. And so I like the fact of what journaling, even if you're just writing a journal at home, a personal journal with respect to your tank, or you have a Word document that's ongoing or
Yeah.
something where you can sort of lay this information down, and not rely always on having that information backed up electronically or digitally, if you will. So
Yeah.
that's just my take. Some things that I enjoy doing.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, while the tank isn't in a living room or a busy space like that, for me, it's in my study. So that's
Oh,
where I
nice.
work, and that's where I work if I need to work from home, or where I'm relaxing in the evenings. And so I'm literally right there. The tank
Oh,
is
wow.
is
Yeah.
right there in the space that I like spending time in. So and you can see everyone hangs out in the corner here. There's the mystery wrats.
Yeah, because that's probably where they get
Um,
fed.
no, no, I actually feed them in this corner over here. So they get
Oh,
fed
sure.
up here. But if I'm sitting
They're
at my desk,
following
and they can see the back of my head right there next to them. So they always hang out in this
you.
corner if I'm down here. But that's exactly it. It's right here as I enter into the study. The first thing I see, and the only thing you can see, is the tank. That's the first thing I look at every time I come downstairs. It's the first thing that I see. Immediately upon getting home and coming down, you come through, you do the once over. You look at the acros doing okay. Is there anything weird with the coralline? Has anything changed? Is the polyp extension looking weird? Are they flowing in the wind? Is anything not opening up? Is it being picked on? And some things are worth worrying about, others aren't. Some of these zoas are sort of half open, and generally that's because the flame hawks like to get in there and sit on them. So that's something that I notice. And if you weren't in tune with your tank, you might look at that and go, "Oh, that's not open. That's
Mhm.
there's clearly a problem in the tank." When realistically, there's not. There's a very simple solution. It's just someone decided that that was a comfortable seat, and that's the answer. And they'll open up
Yeah.
again in half an hour. And there's a little bit of aggression, as you can see, between these three. They're sort of the rulers of the tank, and it's a bit of argy-bargy, but it's a lot of posturing. And I know that because I've seen what the actual aggression looks like, and it's calmed down. But I notice that because I spend so much time observing. and that's, one of the other things I like to do is because the fish, fish recognize you. They know you. They know that you're there to feed
Mhm.
them. They know, so they're ready to look at you. And so sometimes, I'll just be a weirdo. I'll stand back here in the doorway in the dark where they can't see me, and just observe for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Just watch what they're doing. Is there any unusual behavior? Is there anything I need to, do I need to separate someone out? Do I need to do something different? Is someone picking at corals? Is something unusual happening? But you won't be able to get that observation if you're standing directly in the front of the tank where they can potentially see you, because they act very differently.
Well, it's outstanding looking from when you're away from it, because I see some of the Andrew influence with the low lying bommy, allowing for in the future staghorn growth with plenty of open swimming room. So I can see a little bit of the design influence there.
Hmm.
I absolutely love it, man. I mean, and then of course with the metal halides and seeing them just beaming, I can only imagine what this is going to look like in another 6 months to a year. It's just going to be pure insanity, especially if you start loading up,
Hmm.
and start adding more acros. Because clearly, it's there. The system's already saying, anytime you want to go ahead and do what you want to do, it's there.
Yeah.
You can just see it. And there's something to be said again about the metal halides. I know Rich just mentioned that too, but there's just something about the shimmer off the metal halides, and it again, the Kessels have good shimmer, and so do LEDs, but there's just a different effect that with the halide. I don't know, I
Yeah.
can't understand exactly what, but there's something different, and it's just amazing to see it, and it's crisp, just
Yeah.
beautifully crisp. I can see
It,
the.
it really is, and I mean, they're just such a nice light, and they're, they're very easy. They're just, they kind of just work. They've worked for since the '90s, since the '80s. The power compacts and the halide days, where that used to be what
Mhm.
everyone ran. The
So
T8
now,
bulbs and the T5 bulbs.
with the 5 hour schedule, so on either side of that schedule, you just have the single pendant right there in the center with the Ecotech, right? As far as
Yeah,
your up and down mimic, are
yeah,
you
yeah.
gonna incorporate any other type of lighting in the future, or are you just gonna use like straight bars, that type of thing? Um, because from my perspective, I'm a big advocate of lighting. I don't think that more than 5, 6 tops is really the hours that are necessary when you understand, the way the sun moves across the sky,
Mm.
and then you understand the angles, and then you understand that the way refracts as soon as it hits the water and it starts to bend. There's all of those things that happen on top of the water that influence that period of the day where it's necessary for the photosynthesis. But I think with water being under the water, I think that dynamic shifts a little bit. And so I think 5 hours is absolutely perfect. I was just
Mm.
wondering, are you going to, are you going to incorporate T5s, or are you just going to stick to, LED for your up and down sort of ramping?
I mean, I used to love the T5 halide combination with a little bit of LED, but these days, sourcing the halides alone here in Australia is difficult enough. I think I'm going to have to buy them from the US and bring them across that way.
Oh, wow.
And then T5 bulbs are almost impossible to source here as well. So
Hmm.
realistically, because the halides are, that's that primary source of light. That's what's giving life to the tank.
Hmm.
I'm realistically probably just going to do a few LED bars. Do some, maybe do a daylight one and a couple of blues, because at the end of the day, I fully admit I love that Instagram. Get your blues on, take the most fluorescent saturated picture you can, where everything just glows. I love that. So, I will have a couple of those really deep blue LED bars and a couple of sort of more daylight ones, just to get a broad spectrum and be able to have that sort of transition where you go from one blue bar turns on, maybe then the
Mhm.
second blue bar turns on an hour later, and then you have like a daylight bar that comes on, and then those halide bars, then the halides come on. They come on at half an hour separation, so the left one turns on, and then half an hour later I have the right one turn on, and then later in the day the left one turns off, and then half an hour later the right one turns off. And I just do that just because I thought it was fun. I could turn them both on at the same time. I don't think it makes too much of a difference. I don't think that half an hour separation does anything special, but it's just something that I like the way that it happens like that. But yeah, the halides that's that primary source of light. And so
Mhm.
realistically, it's just about what looks good to the eye, what helps with a bit of pop and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's totally cool. Now, do you have any temperature issues at all, or are you able to? I mean, with 5 hours, I imagine you're able to sort of mitigate that, by not running, any other light other than that LED pendant
Hmm.
during the sort of the off photo period. But yeah, do you have any issues with heat, or is it pretty good?
It usually goes up, maybe, so in Celsius it goes up about half a degree over the 5 hours, and that's without the warm weather. I think once summer starts to roll around, that will change, and that in swing might be a lot more. But on the other side of this wall here is the garage, and the garage door is not particularly well sealed or insulated. So, in the next couple of weeks, that's sort of my next project, is to insulate and sort of seal that door. And I think because this room is actually technically underground, that's this wall here is on the other side of here is just solid earth, and that's the next door's place is there, and the same on the other side. So this is sort of all technically underground, so it's really well insulated aside from the
Hmm.
garage door. And so once I do sort of that work, I think that the temperature issues won't be much of a problem. I mean, I've never run a chiller. I didn't run a chiller on the shallow tank when I had the halide on that. But it had a swing of probably 2 degrees. Summer was sort of
Yeah, that's
26 ish to
okay.
27 degrees, but that was just sort of, I chose to do that, and the acros were okay. They responded all right. The only reason the main reason for doing the installation down here is because it's such a small room, and because I do spend a lot of time down here. Um, it gets warm for me. Never mind the fish or the corals. I get hot down here. Being a redhead and fair skinned. I'm very affected by the temperature, and so anything above like 22, 23 degrees starts to get beyond me. So you can imagine what I'm like in Australian summer. It's terrible for me. But yeah, the temperature issues is like 5 hours of 250-watt halides is equivalent to about half a degree on a coolish day, and if it's a warm day, it's maybe a degree.
Yeah, that's definitely you're getting to take advantage of the geological indirect cooling, and then it does the opposite in the winter. So that's pretty
Hmm.
cool that you're sort of underground there. That
Hmm.
it provides you with warmth during the cold times, and that's awesome. Now I
And
was
like
just curious because no, go
I'll
ahead.
just jump in. Like the room too is it's concrete flooring. It's a painted concrete floor. So if shit hits the fan
Oh,
and there's a
okay.
leak or something like that, it doesn't. It's not gonna like it's not like it's on hardwood flooring or carpet where you're gonna have to
Mhm.
tear it all up if drama strikes. So that was sort of another reason why the tank's down here in this room rather than somewhere else in our house.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I just can't even wait to catch up on either your journal or catch up with you and see this again in another 6 months or
Hmm.
a year of what it's going to look like with when you start getting more acros and more coral and stuff in the system. But I mean, it's absolutely stunning, and you should just be proud to be able to sit back and just take it in. I mean, like
Hmm.
it's what this is all about. It's just and to enjoy and whatever draws you in, whether it's coral, fish, or both, or just the ecosystem, or playing around with the equipment, creating things, do it yourself, or testing and sort of the chemistry part of that. I mean, there's so many different things that can like really get you fired up for it. So, to
Hmm.
me, I just wanted to bring, sort of that forward and give everybody an opportunity to say, what are you doing? Like, and we see a lot of crossover and commonalities, but then you see these little different variances from one system to the other. And I think it's important because it sort of shows that there's more than one way to do this thing.
Yeah,
You know?
and I mean, that's other one of the other things is my tank's at a very different stage to like Rich and Lee. They both got jam packed, healthy, amazing colors and all of that. Whereas like I'm at the process where that's sort of just starting. I'm only just starting to add acros. I'm choosing pieces to me that look interesting, but they're kind of browned out and ugly. But we'll develop the color and we'll I mean obviously they look a lot worse on the phone camera, but we'll develop the color and we'll see how they turn out.
Well, you'd be making Andrew proud running those running them halides. I can tell you that. And I remember back in the day, you know, um, one of the things that stuck with me forever about him that he used to say is, if it doesn't show color under whites, it's not colorful.
Mm,
And I
yeah,
just remember like that was just something that always stuck with me. And I was like, man, he's just so dead on. And so I would be questioning, like, when we look at these, and again, it's not, I hate to pick on Instagram because I use it myself, but um, when we look at a lot of where the industry is sort of kind of steered a lot of, or a lot of these systems towards this blue lighting, I question if we were to drop halides like this, or like what's on the other tanks, or the T5 spectrum on top of some of these tanks. My question is, what would they look like, and would
oh,
they still be as
absolutely.
colorful?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of people would be very horrified at what their tanks would look like under some T5 spectrum or some halide lighter spectrum. I think there's a lot of people get the blues and they get the rainbow. I mean, we don't have a lot of rainbow tenuous here in Australia. We miss out on some of those fancy speciosas from Malaysia and some of the Indo tenuous and smooth skins that you guys have access to. Where under blues you just get those rainbow varieties of colors, but under under a wider light they're kind of just dull blue corals.
I mean, I yeah, man. Okay, so I must admit that color has always been a driving factor for me. Like
Mm.
I've been a color guru. That's always been what I've chased, and that goes back to the thread on Reef Central, and a splash of color. And when I think of the color game and the color chase, um, I just it is the species, and there are some of these corals um, that are absolutely the most insanely colorful and amazing corals you've ever seen, that would absolutely look like turds under blue lighting, and would never even be considered.
Mm.
And I think it's just like, to me, it's a testament. It goes to like the coral, and I think we've got it wrong. In many cases, some of the corals that deserve some of the most attention, in my opinion, are anything but speciosa, or anything but tenuous. Not that there's not a place for those, but I'm talking of some spath here, man. I'm talking
Mm.
about some serious, crazy Australian spaths. I'm talking about some of the ice fire echinata that was coming out of Australia, with that blue and white, and you just don't see that. And even if you did see that under blue, it wouldn't look like it does under whites. Um, there's just so many corals like prostrata. Don't see that anymore. I love the knobbies, the you know the shallow water corals.
Mm.
and you don't even hear about those, like the abrahensis or the humilis or the gemifera. All of those to me are the ones that show those hidden, subtle colors that only under T5 and halide to me are captured under a good white light. Now you can get them under probably LED if you're cranking the whites too. But what those are the colors to me that should be highlighted in this acropora part of the segment, if you will, of the hobby. And I like the fact that halides, you put them over your tank and then you put the corals in. You can put them whether it's at the bottom or whether at the top, and it's going to
Mm.
look kick ass. Doesn't matter, you know. So that's you. You don't need a par meter. You don't need any of this data of what's the par or this or that. I mean, like I don't even know. I don't think I've ever even measured par. And by the way, Troy Lee, I've never done ICP-OES either, or mass spectrometer. I haven't done them. So don't feel like you're on your own group out there. I'm right there with you, brother. But yeah, I mean, it's uh, it's just missing, man. And
Yeah, and
and
I think Rich and Lee have got some points there about how the colors can change with LEDs. Some of the corals do look, 10 times better. You get some of those more interesting colors that you can't get under halides that you get with the LEDs. But
Mhm.
I mean, I think Rich is also cheating being able to move them backwards and forwards between LEDs and halides. I
Yeah,
don't
that's.
think I don't think many people are lucky enough to have separate systems with separate lights.
I know. I was gonna do the winter time here in Florida under T5 and then switch to the reef breeders because like six T5s and the reef breeder that I have, it's almost like they're one and the same. And
Mm.
I've swapped them over many times in other reefs equally for the same sort of value. And so I have nothing but positive to say about the reef breeder light that I'm running. Again, I like T5. I like flat. So
Hmm.
when I think I like that flat linear color, and I see a lot of people like the shimmer, right? They like the what the L with the T5 or what the MH bring, the metal halide brings, or what the Kessel and LED bring. But I always liked that flat linear light, and then just looking at like I don't know, like a box of Crayolas across that reef. Um, so when I would see those, those Polish reefers and those Germans that were running T5 lit tanks, I was just in awe, like
Mm.
Christoph Trick, like is my
Yep.
all-time hero and A Reef in the Sky. You remember that one?
Yes.
Uh, under the T5s, and then you had who else? Gosh, there was just so many under T5s.
Mm.
Even Sonny. I remember that one he had. Remember the Sonny X back in the
Yep.
day? He had that T5 lit system, that
Mm.
shallow reef that he had. Oh my god, that thing had me just drooling. So
There were just so many phenomenal tanks, and that was the thing. They were all sort of slightly different. They had different approaches. Different combinations of T5 bulbs, different halides. Some people using. Andrew was a big pusher of the radiums, and I used the radiums mainly because of him. But some people were all about those 10K, the old Iwasaki bulbs.
mhm.
And
Well, K
the
Reef
the
what?
growth under them was insane. But your colors kind of looked like shit. Cool.
Yeah, you there? Sorry about that.
Yep, still here. No, that's all good.
No, what happens is right when we hit the 2 hour mark, that's when it like it just starts. It's almost like I guess it's a YouTube thing where it clocks it at it almost looks like it starts a new live. And for all intents and purposes, I think on my end it does, but it refreshes and it comes right back. So it's all good. As
Yeah.
long as the volume we're not getting any feedback or loop or anything like that, because that's happened before.
No, no, I'm all good. I can't hear any feedback, so hopefully,
All
hopefully it's
right.
all good on your end too.
No, it's all good. Yeah, but definitely with the lighting, man, like and what these guys are talking about, the being a coral whisperer. I'm 110% on board with being a coral whisperer. I think Troy
Mm.
Lee and I have so much in common as far as reef keeping is concerned.
Oh,
In sort of same sort of attitude, like kind of like this don't give a shit real attitude. But
I
it's
agree, and
pretty
I
cool,
think
man.
I think that's a very sort of, it's a bit more of an old school, not, yeah, it's a bit more of an old school mentality of, you don't necessarily do all of this testing and all of this checking, and you just sort of, you pay attention to what's going on, and if something looks or feels off, that's when you do something. You don't do a test and something's low, but everything looks great, and you go out and you change what's low. It's why change it if everything looks fine?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, here's the only thing I would say about like what I've noticed about like LED lit tanks. What I'm encountering is I don't get a very good base growth on the underside of the coral,
Mm.
and that's where T5s to me were the most superior. And it's one of those little things that I've talked about with other guys that have used T5s that were really adamant about T5s, and we sort of come to this consensus that it's not necessarily what's happening on top of the coral. It's the way the linear light works in the system. It almost wraps on the underside of the coral. So you literally are able to grow coral underneath a rock with
Mm.
T5s. Like literally the underside of the coral will literally grow. You could put a frag under a ledge upside down in a T5 system and it would encrust and grow upside down. I've seen it before. So I guess that for me, I always felt like there was just something about that. But either way, man, like if you could take a shop light and literally use a shop light and grow acros. I'm convinced. I don't think it's the most important parameter. Oh hell yeah, you're
Yeah,
feeding.
yeah, yeah. There was a bit of there was a bit of aggression. So usually they
Oh
do that
yeah.
when they get hungry. So I just thought I'd get in some food while they were picking on each other.
Oh heck yeah, you got to do that.
But yeah,
But yeah, I
I
mean
agree with
that's
you.
yeah, that's definitely that's just kind of my personal take on why I stuck to T5s back. I think I started with T5s on a recommendation from my mentor, who was in Don Miller. I don't know if you ever heard that name, but this is back in
Mm.
2005. He was a Zeovit of the Quarter recipient. About 3 months into the award that they would do every quarter on the Zeo site, and
Yep.
so he achieved the status, and I was able to see the reef when it was and I was only about 6 months into the hobby, and he was breaking down his system, and he gave me some T5. He said, "Do me a favor." He goes, "Run T5s if you can, and here's a bulb. Try it out. It's the best bulb you'll ever use." And it was
Yep.
it was the Coralin and Zook Fiji purple, and
Yep.
to this day. I never have seen anything like what I was able to achieve back in the day running T5. 2006, I was running T5s. And, back in that day, there was a lot of, like you were saying earlier, the pitchfork and everything else stuff going on where, it was, there was some wars that were literally ensuing over the debate over T5s and metal halides. And so, yeah, it was pretty heated back in the day. I'm sure you can remember.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. That also sounds very much how I got the halides. Was I got to know Andrew, and basically he just came over one day and was like, "We're putting halides on your tank, and that's what we're doing." I didn't really get much say in it. I don't regret it at all. I think that was the right move. But yeah, he was like, "No, we're getting halides. We're going to put halides on your tank, and that's what we're doing. And you can't tell me no because we're doing it anyway."
No, like I said, man. I think metal halides, like in the perfect world, like I think that there's a place for every single bit of all the lighting, and if you
Mm.
can somehow if you can slap them all together, and you can get the benefit of the outer edges for me would be T5, and again because it wraps that light
Mm.
around the underside of the reef, and then in the center, using the metal halides, particularly the 20K radiums. And then I would incorporate some blue bars. as well. And I would utilize the third technology in the blue spectrum, particularly for the LEDs, because I don't know that you can get such a beautiful blue as you can with that royal blue. So
Hmm.
there's definitely a place for it.
Oh,
That's
I
how I
completely
take it.
agree.
That's my take.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I'm fully with you on that. I agree. I think yeah, there needs to be less sort of one type of light approach, and more of multiple approaches. Even if that's you run different LED bars. You have your big LEDs in the middle, and then you run some strip lighting. That seems to work really well for a lot of people too. So I think it's yeah, I think having an approach that incorporates multiple things works a lot better than just doing one thing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I know we're at 2 hours now. I mean, I'd like to also mention, I know we're just kind of getting started with this hangout, but is there anything on your mind that's like pissing you off recently in the hobby that you want to address here? Let it rip, man. Like, because there's no filters really. I mean, I don't want it to be that way. I want it to be as real as possible, and for it to be conveyed as that. So if there's anything on your mind, man, let it rip.
I mean, there's always things that annoy me. I mean, I will just jump in and show the mural that sits on the other side of the tank. That was my partner in the comments. Got this commissioned by one of my favorite artists on the other side of the tank.
Oh wow, that's
And so
killer.
you can imagine
Now
that's
now
all
is
fluoro reactive paint. So when the blues are on, this whole wall basically just glows.
yes, that was what I was gonna ask. That's sick. That is absolutely stunning. I can't make it out, but I mean just the detail is just amazing. I'm trying to like okay, it's coming together
Sort of like
now.
an anglerfish
Oh,
and
that's
some
pretty cool.
jellyfish. Some cats because we have cats and I love cats.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
So yeah, so
Oh yeah,
very very cool
that's
space.
badass.
So obviously being down here in the study and near the tank and all of that sort of thing, it's one of those spaces that I love
Mhm.
being in. It's good for me, and so it's being down here is always nice.
I'm
But
gonna
then yeah,
I'm gonna probably go live outside next time. I might even like I think I might just go sit in the middle of like my herb garden. I've got like all these different gardens. I got one like my herb garden is absolutely like zen. It's just like the location of it where it catches sunlight, it's just like I
mm,
meditate there and whatnot. But yeah, man, I mean it's just important that we connect. My tank is near the door, so where I sit outside, I have a fire pit. So like when I walk out my French doors, like to get out my
mhm.
into my back part of my garden, you walk right out, and I've got a fire pit like within 10 paces, and
Yes,
we gather out there, for some fire, and it's just kind of like it's kind of cool because the tank's close by to it, but yeah, I think that's important is to get the reef in a location in a room, if you will, that's going to be a room that you're going to spend time in, and that's good that you've got your setup there, a place where you can, where you can just like catch your moment, your zen, if you will, because it's
yeah,
really important. That parlays in that philosophical reefing where it kind of comes over and transitions into the animals, I think, anyway.
yeah.
So yeah, it's good that you mentioned that's your safe space, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. I think yeah, you've got to have the tank somewhere where you enjoy being because if you don't enjoy being there, why would you go and look at the tank?
Absolutely. Yeah,
But yeah,
I see Rich commenting on Sunny right there, and yeah, I actually I think I reached out to Sunny. I'm gonna
mm,
try to get him to come on here. Um, and yeah, I think we're gonna try to do a live panel where we're gonna get some different people together and stuff. So yeah, we're just gonna continue to do this, man,
yeah,
and just keep having fun and like I said, the whole vibration is like it's just like if we were like able to hang out together and you lived in the same town as me or vice versa, and I don't drink beer anymore, but if I did, It'd be like let's share a beer or a coffee, tea,
Mm,
whatever. Let's hang out and let's shoot the shit about some reef keeping. So while we can't exactly do that in each other's local area, I felt like let's bring it here. And so
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm
I agree. I think what you're doing is a fantastic idea. I think it's a good way to just have a casual approach to the hobby. It's a good way to get people talking about things that they like, that they don't like. Show their systems a little bit. It's not formal. It's not scripted. It's a bit sort of off the cuff. It's a bit more casual.
totally.
As a way to do it, yeah, I think it's a really good idea. I really enjoy it.
It kind of came to me, man, like because I go back and you'd be surprised. Like I don't do any any videos that I put out. I think I've got over 100 now on my channel here. I don't think I don't know that. Well, first of all, I don't edit them. I've never even done an edit. I don't even know how to, even if I did. And then secondly, I don't do a second take. So I felt like from the beginning, whenever I started doing this, I was like, I want this to come across as like if I screw up in the middle of a video to just keep rolling with it and not to stop the video and repeat it and start over again. So yeah, it was always the way I wanted this to grow was to grow the channel through grassroots, through one reefer at a time, like literally one reefer at a time, one subscriber at a time,
Yep.
one comment, one whatever, and we just do this and grow together and that's like sort of my passion is to teach. It's to share and to pass along uh, my experiences. Because in the end, it's not about like what I know. I mean, what I know is what I've experienced, and that's all I can
Mm,
really share.
mm,
So I can share a lot of experiences, and I think that the only us older old guys that have been in the hobby a long time, I think the only credit we're due is just the credit of our experience, and I think that's all I'm trying to bring forward here. So
yeah, absolutely. And that experience is worth its weight in gold. I think there's a lot to be said. There are some fantastic young guys out there. You look at some of the stuff like Salem's doing, and what he was doing with Reef Builders,
absolutely.
but now he's doing on his own, and some of that bacterial research, some of the stuff that Andrew and Polo Reef, some of the more because he has the availability, the funding to be
Mhm.
able to do some of those more complex things, and he has access to those animals and that giant tank and multiple setups. There's some really great work that's occurring with some of those new up and comers. But I think there's also a lot to be said that for people that have been doing it for 10, 15, 20, 40 years and the experience that they have. And obviously there's a lot of things that people that have been doing it for a long time can relate to that newer people might not necessarily be able to. For example, being able to just look at your tank and tell if something's off. That only comes with experience. If you've only been
Mhm.
doing it for 6 months, you're not going to recognize some of those smaller signs. You're not going to recognize that there's something going wrong is actually a larger issue than it might appear at first. And yeah, so there is, with that experience comes the ability to identify these things. And I think, yeah, there seems to be a bit more of a higher turnover in the hobby at the moment. And I think that's probably symptomatic of the wider state of the world in terms of, how expensive life is at the moment. And, the first thing that gets cut is the expensive hobbies. And,
Sure.
I don't go out and I'm not spending, big amounts of money. I can't go out and buy, 20 acros in one piece, but maybe once a month or every couple of weeks I go here and, pick up a few nice pieces. But I'd
Yeah,
rather
yeah,
I'd rather do it.
I totally agree with you. And like, look, man, I garden the same way. I mean, like, I created a worm farm out of a vermicomposting worm farm out of a Rubbermaid bin
Yep.
and some some leaf mulch from the yard. I threw it all together, and and it's just a way that I can. I don't have to buy fertilizer. I can just take worm castings and I can put them next to all my fruit trees and and top dress and just
Yep.
use Mother Nature, right? And so, do I really
Fantastic.
need to spend an arm and a leg at the feed store buying, all of these different things? I don't. And so, yeah, there's just so many different ways to go about this. And like for me right now, let's be frank, the economy's hurting a lot of people out there. I think that's important why I did this channel. I wanted to do this because I want to break from I don't want to watch the news, man. Like I don't want to watch anything that's going on the news. I don't want to watch politics. I don't really want to watch sports. I mean, this is just me. Like if you watch it, it's cool. Like I don't really
Yeah.
care. But for me, I just want to I want to step away from the constant slam of what's going on out in the virtual world into my world. And instead, I want to bring the reefing world out,
Yeah.
and bring that out into and put that out in front and instead of just being bombarded by all this other horse shit in my opinion. So keeping that in mind, my system is well within range. It's a 30 gallons 30 something gallons of water total, and I mean for me to keep up after it, hey, I don't have to do anything but water changes like Troy Lee mentioned last week, and I'm watching him and I'm like, what the I'm sitting here worrying about chasing my tail with carbon dosing and this and this and this. And then finally, I just like talking to him, like halfway through the thing, the light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, hey, Perry, dumbass. And this is a conversation I'm literally having in my own head. I'm like, hey, dumbass. You know, the algae you're dealing with right now, I bet you if you stop feeding them with carbon source, I bet you they'd go away on their own. And so I got my salt in and I did a 10-gallon water change, which is like 40%. Next day, 10
Mhm.
gallon. I haven't put carbon or bacteria in the tank the whole week. And guess what? Algaes are like saying, hey, like where's the source at?
Yeah.
You cut me off, man. Where is it?
Yeah.
And so yeah, all of a sudden I'm looking at the reef and I'm going, now, all these little problems, all these little ticks that I've been battling with were at my own demise. And so that's what this is about. It's like sometimes you just need a reminder of like, man, like get back to the basics, dude. You know?
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah.
said to myself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's those basics that you build everything off, and so if you do the basics well, then the rest of it sort of just follows. And you can, and that's exactly right. You can do it multiple ways. Like you talking of your garden. We've got a small little balcony on this place, so I don't really have a lot of room to grow stuff. But I'm like you. I love gardening as well. On our little balcony, I've got a couple of lemon trees. I've got a little peach and nectarine dwarf bush. I've got an apple tree, and then I've got my small rose collection. But I don't have the ability to do any of, we don't have a worm farm. There's simply no space for that kind of thing. So I go to the store and I buy those, slow release pellet fertilizers because that's
Hmm.
what I have access to. And that's what I'm capable of doing in the space that I'm given, and would I love to be able to have a worm farm and do castings and and all of that? Yeah, absolutely. That's my goal. And when we have a place that has a garden, I will be doing those sorts of things. But circumstances permitting, it is what it is, and how I manage it. The plants grow well. They're doing all right. Got a couple of fruits bearing at the moment, so it's not necessarily the wrong way or the right way. It's just one way to approach it.
I all I can tell you is there's man, I just went with my way because I happen to be in a heavy oak area. I've got about
Hmm.
almost a half an acre of property,
Yep.
and if you use that properly, you can grow all the food that you need
Yeah.
and on that footprint. And so I just use the oak leaves are rich in calcium, so I don't have to really worry about calcium. I've got so much worms already access. They're already rampant. I get
Yeah.
I get with a mulch company, and for $20, right, US, they'll deliver 16 to 20 yards of wood chips
Oh,
that were
wow. Yeah.
just chopped out of trees from hurricanes and things like that or cleanup. And so then that wood is local wood. And so the wood is local and it's chipped and then it composts on its own on site. And then I use it and I just keep putting a layer every year, another layer, another layer, another layer, a couple times a year, whatever. And now the soil is so like I just let everything fall.
Yeah.
Banana tree leaves, They fall, they stay where they're at. Wherever it falls, it stays and it goes back into the earth. And then my fruit scraps and cardboard and paper and all that stuff I compost. And look, I'm not saving the world, but I do my one little piece. And I think it's like it's just what are you conscientious of it? For me,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to stay conscientious of it. That's all.
Yeah, no, completely agree, and and that's the thing is you just need to be aware of what your circumstances are. You have access to all of those things, so you'd be mad not to use them. I
Absolutely.
don't have access to them, so like I unfortunately can't use them. But the way that I do my gardening, and everything is in pots. Everything is, I've got to hand water everything with a watering can because we don't have a hose on the balcony because it's so small. And I've fertilizer and worm castings. I have to buy those things because we can't do them ourselves. But everything is growing. It's all happy. You notice that maybe something's got it. I mean, there's a lot of crossover between keeping a reef and keeping a garden. I think
Totally.
they're very similar in terms of managing things, even when it comes to pruning stuff, cutting the roses back each year, and as they go into winter and dormancy, all of that sort of stuff. it's
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 it's a
it's a
hundred
lot of fun.
percent. It's 100%, dude. I actually take my skimmer and I incorporate it. So I do a series of compost. I've got, you know, not just one. I have a worm farm that I use for vermicomposting, and then that's a
Yep.
targeted nitrogen based, heavy with alfalfa and comfrey that I work in out of the garden, and then I work it
Yep.
into and I make my castings from that. But then you've got, I've got other types of composting that I do on site. But yeah, I mean, it's just it would be ridiculous for me not to utilize those opportunities. And yeah, it's so in line with reef keeping, and the crossover is so real that I think that's why I got back into reef keeping, is because I was overwhelmed with gardening. And I finally got my handle on gardening. And then I'm like, all right, I miss reef keeping. So it
Yep.
gave me a refreshed perspective. When I did come back, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm looking at this through a whole different lens now. I don't
Mm.
have the same like look really on life. Like gardening has
Yeah.
changed a lot for me about a lot of things, and
Mm.
I would like to think for the better. So yeah, man, I'm just stoked that you're doing it on that level. And what does that apple taste like? What does that piece of citrus taste like when you've
Mm.
grown it yourself?
Yeah.
It's like
Even if they taste terrible, we had, I think I ended up with one apple last year, and it was probably the worst apple I've ever eaten. But it was an apple I grew, and so just in that satisfaction alone, it was worth its. It was absolutely worth every moment. Even if it was terrible, I didn't care. I'd grown that apple myself. That start to finish, that's a tree I've had for years and years, and it's only finally now, mature enough to actually produce fruit. So, getting that very first apple after I think I've had that tree for probably 4 or 5 years now, even longer. Getting that first fruit, it was terrible. I'm the first to admit it was not a nice apple, but it was fantastic. It was great. I was thrilled. I'd grown that apple from nothing.
that's funny as hell, man. I've got papayas coming in. I've got June plums coming in. It's a
Yeah.
late season kind of thing. I got some real random stuff happening with my guavas where they decided to do
Yep.
like some weird late flowering thing, and so I've
Yeah.
got a couple guavas that popped up out there. But yeah, we're getting to that time of year where like I'm starting to think about winter crops right now. Like,
Mhm.
I'm probably going to plant some lettuces and things like that and see if I can't, eat that for the winter time and maybe, incorporate more lettuce into my diet that way, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's all good, man. I mean, it brought us together. It brings reefing minds together. And I'm just really thankful that you took the time out of your life to catch me up what's going on, man. It means the world to me.
No, no, I'm more than happy to, and thank you for inviting me, and for the fact that you think of me as someone that you would like to have on and have a chat with is, I'm thrilled about that in itself. Usually I'm not really a big fan of. I mean, I've been asked before by other people, but I'm not the biggest fan of being able to do that sort of thing. But when you asked and the way you're running it, absolutely, I love this sort of thing. More than happy to be a part of it, and really appreciate you asking me.
Oh, absolutely, man. Like, so Troy Lee was saying the same thing, and now he mentioned, yes, we're going to be doing the December 5th. By the way, Rich and Troy Lee, and I think Alan's going to come in at about 6 o'clock next week, and so we're gonna do another one. We're gonna try. It's gonna. I don't even know what I'm doing, man. I'm just gonna throw it together, and we're gonna have four of us, and we're gonna
Yep.
see where it all shakes out. And the idea here, and like with you, the idea was never like I have a journal where it's the same 7 things that I was going to kind of follow, and I didn't look at it once tonight. I don't follow scripts when I do videos. Everything is just like, and if that is what people are looking for, and because it's something different than what they're used to seeing these days, I'm stoked to be able to provide that for them. And as far as you're concerned, you're a peer, and you're somebody I highly admire on many levels, some that we don't even get into today. But I know more about you than you know. I mean, not that I've gone and done any weird research or anything, but no, we all keep up with each other, and sometimes we know more than we don't or whatever. But either way, I followed you as well for years. I consider you a friend. I can consider
Yeah,
you a
absolutely.
mentor. I consider you an equal. I don't look at things this way. I can admit there were times in my life where if you go back and look at all my notes from the boards back in the day, you may pick up on some sort of thinking I'm better or whatever. Like, nah, man, I had some things happen in my world that changed my perspective on
Hmm.
many things, and I'm just grateful for that change, and I'm just grateful for where life is brought me. And so judgment is not something that I have in me for anything. So I don't look at you any different than I look at myself or anyone else. Even some of the ones out there that have endless pockets for doing this. I still look at you, me, or anyone in the same sort of vein, if you will. And so that's just how I roll these days, man. So like this isn't about that. There's so much to uncover, even if you're not currently at a place where you're like, well, I'm not really stoked with acros. Man, look past that. Look at the fish. Look at how amazing your fish collection is. Acros, yeah, you can get them later, but your fish collection is insanity. And you should be proud of that. And what you bring and what everyone brings is a refreshed perspective for reef keeping. And in there are gold bars. In there are messages that some people may take the time to watch, some might not. But in this dialogue for me and somewhere for you, in our dialogue together, our catch up, if you will, we are going to walk away with maybe a different perspective than we may have had we not done this. So if it's for nothing less, it's for you and I to connect, and maybe in our conversation we learn something from one another. And that's what a reef hangout would be. That's what a Friday night to me would be. If I could have it every week, it would be 10 guys sitting around talking shit about reef keeping and laughing and having a good time. But that's not where
Yeah.
we're at. So until then, I'm like, let's bring this forward. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, no, I'm fully on board with that, and I think it's just such a fantastic way to get people involved and actually hear from people, hear them speak, hear them talk about the things that they like, the things that they don't like, yeah, and as Lee's just said, put faces to screen names, see
Mhm.
what people actually look like, scope them out, decide if they're if you like the way they look or not. No, I would never do that, but it's
No,
always
I
nice to
appreciate the humor.
yeah, yeah. It's always nice to you've talked to these people for years and years, and you know about them. You've heard their names. You've seen their tanks, and so to actually sit down and interact directly is fantastic. And it's one of those things where like I'm potentially it looks like I'll be in the US in late Jan next year, and on the forums I've already said these are the dates that I'll be in sort of in San Fran, so I'll be on the West Coast. Is
Mhm.
anyone nearby, or is there anyone I can catch up with? Because it's all well and good to talk on the forums, but like I love catching up with people in person. Love talking to them, and all of that sort of thing. And it almost worked out where, someone I know that's on the East Coast was actually in Vegas at the time, but that hasn't worked out. But it would be funny, I travel from Australia to the West Coast and they're traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast, and you meet up in somewhere that's neither of where you live. And, you have these funny interactions. And yeah, I think it's awesome, whether it's in person or it's, on a platform like this. It's just such a fantastic thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just grateful. And on that note, like if you encounter, some of the guys that we used to have dialogue with, and and names, and they're and like you uncover these all these reefers that we used to just like, shoot the shit with all the time. Point them
Hmm.
this direction or whatever. Like, hopefully they bring themselves forward. Like, just like meeting up with Rich, and I'm, like, dude, it was the most killer honor in the world. He reached out to me, he was following me on YouTube, and I'm like, dude, you are a mentor of mine. And it's like, it's just awesome. And then like I've had, just great interaction. Like Saheen, I react had a reaction with him about a year ago, and
Yep.
he was an old mentor, and it's so cool to sort of bring that all forward and reconnect and catch up. Where's life brought you? Where are you
Mhm.
at? Where's your reef at? What's your philosophy this time? And how is things going? I think it's just great, and it's funny because, and I'll slow down. But we come back to full circle, and it's funny how a lot of the guys that were out there chasing a lot of the things that we were chasing in the day, if we've just come full circle and are just like, oh, screw it, I just want to go back to the basics of doing this shit and enjoy it, and get similar, if not better, results. So crazy.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, yeah, I did. Yeah, as I said, I sent out a couple of messages the other night just to see where people were at. If they respond to me, they respond to me. If they don't see them, they don't see them. And yeah, and Sahim, yeah, it'd be great to touch base with him. He was always a character. I really liked him. I might actually send him a message today because I'm friends with him on Facebook. So hopefully I can get a response from him. I know he still uses Facebook, so I'll send him a message and catch up and see how he's doing. Because yeah, I think it's also just worth checking in on your friends. That's the thing. There's a couple of people that I know that have passed away, not super recently, but semi recently. Like Alex Costa. He was always a really good friend of mine. I think he was in Brazil. He had phenomenal tank, but we used to just
Mhm.
talk random nonsense on Instagram. We just send a message to each other every so often. How you going? Catch up with what's happening and that sort of thing. And I heard about his passing a few years ago, and it's
Mhm.
really devastating learning these sorts of things. And Simon Naja in the UK, we learnt he was a huge personality on multiple forums. And I've known him for years. And unfortunately, we learnt of his passing, somewhat recently as well. So whether they're your in-person close friends that you've known for years, that you went to school with them, or you did university with them, or you met them through work, or they're friends online, I think it's important that you touch base with these people. You check in, see how they're going, whether they're reefing, they're doing anything, they're doing nothing, just to say hello. Just remind them that there's someone out there that said that I care enough to reach out to
Did you see what Troy Lee said? A pee break. Yeah, I know, dude. I'm gonna be running to the toilet as soon as we get done with this shit right here. And it's not for that, by the way. No, I have to take a pee break myself. But no, man. Yeah, I just am delighted that you took the time, and I'm so stoked to we've been able to meet face to face. I mean, we've followed each other for years, and it's about damn time.
you.
So
Yep.
yeah, listen, thank you so much. And if there's anything else, we'll guys, I guess we'll all catch up next week. And yeah, just dude, blessed to
No, no.
have you, man. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. As you said, it's been fantastic to catch up. It's so nice to actually meet in person. I've watched the last couple of live streams, so I've gotten to know you in terms of what you look like over the last couple of hours of that sort of thing. But to have that actual chat, yeah, no, it's been fantastic. It's been really
I got
lovely.
this. I got a chipped tooth, and it's a funny story. I'll finish here. So that'll be my reef pitch for the week. When I was setting up this tank, I had an acrylic dosing container for 2-part, and it was like a pretty substantial, heavy acrylic. And I put it in a box, and I went to move the box and set it down on the floor, and the box caught like an edge on something for whatever reason. That acrylic box shot up and like literally hit me dead square in the tooth. And where I'm at in life, because I'm like a bachelor, dude, and I'm done with dating. Like I'll just be forever not dating. I'm so stoked to be alone and everything where I'm at. Um, that's a whole sidebar. But when that shit happened, I was like, all right, I guess I'm gonna look like, like Dumb and Dumber from here on out. And my mom's like, I'm gonna fix your tooth. And I'm like, no, you're not. I'm like, I'm gonna rock the Dumb and Dumber look. And yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't care because I'm older now and I just don't give a you know what. But no, I care greatly, but there's some things I don't like. Vanity is not my thing anymore. So this is what I look like. It's good to catch up with you. I always knew that you were fair skinned, and I knew that you were I guess have the red hair and sort of the gingery kind of vibe going on.
Yeah.
I remember talking about the sun one time or something, and you weren't a big fan of that.
No.
So I get it.
Yeah.
So I guess I can't
things.
turn you on to sun gazing and sunbathing like I do every day.
Yeah,
'Cause
no,
I spend
I'd turn into I'd burn up. I'd look like a lobster.
Man, I appreciate you taking the time. I'm very grateful that you took the time, and we'll catch up real soon, brother.
Yep.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody who happened to join along. And I'll see you
Yeah.
soon, brother.
No worries. I'll see you later.
All right,
Have
Dom.
a good
Take
one.
care. Thanks again, bro.
Enjoy your weekend.
You as well.